Prologue. Clad in his customary black and silver, with raven hair unpowdered and elaborately dressed, diamonds on his fingers and in his cravat, Hugh Tracy Clare Belmanoir, Duke of Andover, sat at the escritoire in the library of his townhouse, writing. He wore no rouge on his face, the almost unnatural pallor of which seemed designedly enhanced by a patch set beneath his right eye. Brows and lashes were black, the former slanting slightly up at the corners, but his narrow, heavy-lidded eyes were green and strangely piercing. The thin lips curled a little, sneering, as one dead-white hand travelled to and fro across the paper. But it seems that the fair lady has a brother, who, finding me enamoured, threw down the gauntlet. I soundly whipped the presumptuous child, and so the affair ends. Now, as you, my dear Frank, also took some interest in the lady, I write for the express purpose of informing you that at my hands she has received no hurt, nor is not like to. This I in part tell you that you shall not imagine why ourself in honour bound again to call me out, which purpose, and I mistake not, I yesterday read in why our eyes. I should be exceeding loath to meet you in a second time, when I should consider it my duty to teach you an even severer lesson than before. This I am not wishful of doing for the liking I bear you. So in all friendship believe me, Frank. Your most obedient, humble devil. His Grace of Andover paused, pen held in mid-air. A mocking smile dawned in his eyes, and he wrote again. In the event of any desire on our part to hazard our luck with my late paramour, permit me to warn you against the bantam brother, who is in very truth a fire-eater, and would wish to make of you, as of me, one mouthful. I shall hope to see you at the Queensberry rout on Thursday, when you may once more strive to direct mine erring footsteps onto the thorny path of virtue. His Grace read the postscript through with another satisfied, sardonic smile. Then he folded the letter, and affixing a wafer, peremptorily struck the handbell at his side. And the Honourable Frank Fortescue, reading the postscript half an hour later, smiled too, but differently. Also he sighed and put the letter into the fire. And so ends another affair. I wonder if you'll go insolently to the very end, he said softly, watching the paper shrivel and flare up. I would to God you might fall honestly in love and that the lady might save you from yourself, my poor devil. I at the Chequers Inn, Fallowfield. Chadber was the name of the host, florid of countenance, portly of person, and of manner pompous and urbane. Solely within the walls of the Chequers lay his world, that in having been acquired by his great-grandfather as far back as the year 1667, when the jovial Stuart king sat on the English throne, and the Hanoverian electors were not yet dreamed of. A Tory was Mr. Chadber to the backbone. None so bitter against the little German as he, and surely none had looked forward more eagerly to the advent of the gallant Charles Edward. If he confined his patriotism to drinking success to Prince Charlie's campaign, who shall blame him? And if, when sundry Whig gentlemen halted at the Chequers on their way to the coast, and, calling for a bottle of Rhenish, bade him toss down a glass himself with a health to his Majesty, again who shall blame Mr. Chadber for obeying? What was a health one way or another when you had rendered active service to two of his Stuart Highness's adherents? It was Mr. Chadber's boast, uttered only to his admiring Tory neighbours, that he had, at the risk of his own life, given shelter to two fugitives of the disastrous '45, who had come so far out of their way as quiet Fallowfield. That no one had set eyes on either of the men was no reason for doubting an honest landlord's word. But no one would have thought of doubting any statement that Mr. Chadber might make. Mine host of the Chequers was a great personage in the town, being able both to read and to write, and having once, when young, travelled as far north as London town, staying there for 10 days and setting eyes on no less a person than the great Duke of Marlborough himself when that gentleman was riding along the Strand on his way to St. James's. Also, it was a not-to-be-ignored fact that Mr. Chadber's home-brewed ale was far superior to that sold by the landlord of the rival inn at the other end of the village. Altogether he was a most important character, and no one was more aware of his importance than his worthy self. To gentlemen born, whom, he protested, he could distinguish at a glance, he was almost obsequiously polite, but on clerks and underlings, and men who bore no signs of affluence about their persons, he wasted none of his deference. Thus it was that, when a little green-clad lawyer alighted one day from the mail coach and entered the coffee-room at the Chequers, he was received with pomposity and scarce-veiled condescension. He was nervous, it seemed, and more than a little worried. He offended Mr. Chadber at the outset, when he insinuated that he was come to meet a gentleman who might perhaps be rather shabbily clothed, rather short of purse, and even of rather unsavoury repute. Very severely did Mr. Chadber give him to understand that guests of that description were entirely unknown at the Chequers. There was an air of mystery about the lawyer, and it appeared almost as though he were striving to probe mine host. Mr. Chadber bridled a little, and became aloof and haughty. When the lawyer dared openly to ask if he had had any dealings with highwaymen of late, he was properly and thoroughly affronted. The lawyer became suddenly more at ease. He eyed Mr. Chadber speculatively, holding a pinch of snuff to one thin nostril. "Perhaps you have staying here a certain Sir Anthony Ferndale," he hazarded. The gentle air of injury fell from Mr. Chadber. Certainly he had, and come only yesterday a purpose to meet his solicitor. The lawyer nodded. "I am he. Be so good as to apprise Sir Anthony of my arrival." Mr. Chadber bowed exceeding low, and implored the lawyer not to remain in the draughty coffee-room. Sir Anthony would never forgive him, and he allowed his solicitor to await him there. Would he not come to Sir Anthony's private parlour? The very faintest of smiles creased the lawyer's thin face as he walked along the passage in Mr. Chadber's wake. He was ushered into a low-ceilinged, pleasant chamber looking out onto the quiet street, and left alone what time Mr. Chadber went in search of Sir Anthony. The room was panelled and ceilinged in oak, with blue curtains to the windows and blue cushions on the high-backed settle by the fire. A table stood in the centre of the floor, with a white tablecloth thereon and places laid for two. Another smaller table stood by the fireplace, together with a chair and a stool. The lawyer took silent stock of his surroundings, and reflected grimly on the landlord's sudden change of front. It would appear that Sir Anthony was a gentleman of some standing at the Chequers. Yet the little man was plainly unhappy, and fell to pacing to and fro, his chin sunk low on his breast, and his hands clasped behind his back. He was come to seek the disgraced son of an earl, and he was afraid of what he might find. 6 years ago Lord John Carstares, eldest son of the Earl of Wyncham, had gone with his brother, the Honourable Richard, to a card party, and had returned a dishonoured man. That Jack Carstares should cheat was incredible, ridiculous, and at first no one had believed the tale that so quickly spread. But he had confirmed that tale himself, defiantly and without shame, before riding off, bound, men said, for France and the foreign parts. Brother Richard was left, so said the countryside, to marry the lady they were both in love with. Nothing further had been heard of Lord John, and the outraged Earl forbade his name to be mentioned at Wyncham, swearing to disinherit the prodigal. Richard espoused the fair Lady Lavinia and brought her to live at the great house, strangely forlorn now without Lord John's magnetic presence, but, far from being an elated bridegroom, he seemed to have brought gloom with him from the honeymoon, so silent and so unhappy was he. 6 years drifted slowly by without bringing any news of Lord John, and then, 2 months ago, journeying from London to Wyncham, Richard's coach had been waylaid, and by a highwayman who proved to be none other than the scapegrace peer. Richard's feelings may be imagined. Lord John had been singularly unimpressed by anything beyond the humour of the situation. That, however, had struck him most forcibly, and he had burst out into a fit of laughter that had brought a lump into Richard's throat, and a fresh ache into his heart. Upon pressure John had given his brother the address of the inn, in case of accidents, and told him to ask for Sir Anthony Ferndale if ever he should need him. Then with one hearty handshake, he had galloped off into the darkness. The lawyer stopped his restless pacing to listen. Down the passage was coming the tap-tap of high heels on the wooden floor, accompanied by a slight rustle as of stiff silks. The little man tugged suddenly at his cravat. Supposing debonair Lord John was no longer debonair? Supposing, he dared not suppose anything. Nervously he drew a roll of parchment from his pocket and stood fingering it. A firm hand was laid on the door handle, turning it cleanly round. The door opened to admit a veritable apparition, and was closed again with a snap. The lawyer found himself gazing at a slight, rather tall gentleman who swept him a profound bow, gracefully flourishing his smart three-cornered hat with one hand and delicately clasping cane and perfumed handkerchief with the other. He was dressed in the height of the Versailles fashion, with full-skirted coat of palest lilac laced with silver, small clothes and stockings of white, and waistcoat of flowered satin. On his feet he wore shoes with high red heels and silver buckles, while a wig of the latest mode, marvelously powdered and curled and smacking greatly of Paris, adorned his shapely head. In the foaming lace of his cravat reposed a diamond pin, and on the slim hand, half covered by drooping laces, glowed and flashed a huge emerald.
The lawyer stared and stared again, and it was not until a pair of deep blue, rather wistful eyes met his in a quizzical glance, that he found his tongue. Then a look of astonishment came into his face, and he took a half-step forward. "Master Jack," he gasped. "Master Jack." The elegant gentleman came forward and held up a reproving hand. The patch at the corner of his mouth quivered, and the blue eyes danced. "I perceive that you are not acquainted with me, Mr. Warburton," he said, amusement in his pleasant, slightly drawling voice. "Allow me to present myself, Sir Anthony Ferndale, of Vaux-Servier." A gleam of humor appeared in the lawyer's own eyes as he clasped the outstretched hand. "I think you are perhaps not acquainted with yourself, my lord," he remarked dryly. Lord John laid his hat and cane on the small table, and looked faintly intrigued. "What's your meaning, Mr. Warburton?" "I am come, my lord, to inform you that the Earl, your father, died a month since." The blue eyes widened, grew of a sudden hard, and narrowed again. "Is that really so?" Well. Apoplexy, I make no doubt." The lawyer's lips twitched uncontrollably. "No, Master Jack, my lord died of heart failure." "Say you so? Dear me. But will you not be seated, sir? In a moment my servant will have induced the chef to serve dinner. You will honor me, I trust." The lawyer murmured his thanks and sat down on the settle, watching the other with puzzled eyes. The Earl drew up a chair for himself and stretched his foot to the fire. 6 years, eh? I protest 'tis prodigious good to see your face again, Mr. Warburton. And am the Earl? Earl and High Toby, by gad." He laughed softly. "I have here the documents, my lord." Carstares eyed the roll through his quizzing glass. "I perceive them. Pray return them to your pocket, Mr. Warburton." "But there are certain legal formalities, my lord." "Exactly. Pray do not let us mention them." "But, sir—" Then the Earl smiled, and his smile was singularly sweet and winning. "At least, not until after dinner, Warburton. Instead, you shall tell me how you found me." "Mr. Richard directed me where to come, sir." "Ah, of course. I had forgot that I told him my pied-à-terre when I waylaid him." The lawyer nearly shuddered at this cheerful, barefaced mention of his lordship's disreputable profession. Indeed, sir. Mr. Richard is eager for you to return." The handsome young face clouded over. My lord shook his head. "Impossible, my dear Warburton. I am convinced Dick never voiced so foolish a suggestion. Come now, confess, 'tis your own fabrication." Warburton ignored the bantering tone and spoke very deliberately. "At all events, my lord, I believe him anxious to make amends." Carstares shot an alert, suspicious glance at him. "Ah, Yes, sir. Amends. My lord studied his emerald with half-closed eyelids. But why amends, Warburton? He asked. Is not that the word, sir? I confess it strikes me as inapt. Doubtless I am dull of comprehension. You were not wont to be, my lord. No? But 6 years changes a man, Warburton. Pray, is Mr. Carstares well? I believe so, sir, replied the lawyer, frowning at the deft change of subject. And Lady Lavinia? Eh? Mr. Warburton looked searchingly across at him, seeing which, my lord's eyes danced afresh, brimful with mischief. I am delighted to hear it. Pray present my compliments to Mr. Carstares and beg him to use Wyncham as he wills. Sir! Master Jack! I implore you, burst from the lawyer, and he sprang up, moving excitedly away, his hands twitching, his face haggard. My lord stiffened in his chair. He watched the other's jerky movements anxiously, but his voice when he spoke was even and cold. Well, sir? Mr. Warburton wheeled and came back to the fireplace, looking hungrily down at my lord's impassive countenance. With an effort he seemed to control himself. Master Jack, I had better tell you what you have already guessed. I know. Up went one haughty eyebrow. You know what, Mr. Warburton? That you are innocent. Of what, Mr. Warburton? Of cheating at cards, sir. My lord relaxed, and flicked a speck of dust from his great cuff. I regret the necessity of having to disillusion you, Mr. Warburton. My lord, do not fence with me, I beg. You can trust me, surely? Certainly, sir. Then do not keep up this pretense with me, no, nor look so hard neither. I've watched you grow up right from the cradle, and Master Dick too, and I know you both through and through. I know you never cheated at Colonel Dare's nor anywhere else. I could have sworn it at the time, when I saw Master Dick's face, I knew at once that he it was who had played foul, and you had but taken the blame. No. I know better. Can you, Master Jack, look me in the face and truthfully deny what I have said? Can you? Can you? My lord sat silent. With a sigh, Warburton sank onto the settle once more. He was flushed, and his eyes shone, but he spoke calmly again. Of course you cannot. I have never known you lie. You need not fear I shall betray you. I kept silence all these years for my lord's sake, and I will not speak now until you give me leave. Which I never shall. Master Jack, think better of it, I beg of you. Now that my lord is dead. It makes no difference. No difference. 'Twas not for his sake. 'Twas not because you knew how he loved Master Dick. No. Then 'tis Lady Lavinia. No. But. My lord smiled sadly. Ah, Warburton. And you averred you knew us through and through. For whose sake should it be but his own? I feared it. The lawyer made a hopeless gesture with his hands. You will not come back. No, Warburton, I will not. Dick may manage my estates. I remain on the road. Warburton made one last effort. My lord, he cried despairingly, will you not at least think of the disgrace to the name and you be caught? The shadows vanished from my lord's eyes. Mr. Warburton, I protest you are of a morbid turn of mind. Do you know, I had not thought of so unpleasant a contingency. I swear I was not born to be hanged. The lawyer would have said more, had not the entrance of a servant, carrying a loaded tray, put an end to all private conversation. The man placed dishes upon the table, lighted candles, and arranged 2 chairs. Dinner is served, sir, he said. My lord nodded, and made a slight gesture toward the windows. Instantly the man went over to them and drew the heavy curtains across. My lord turned to Mr. Warburton. "What say you, sir? Shall it be Burgundy or claret, or do you prefer sack?" Warburton decided in favor of claret. "Claret, Jim," ordered Carstares, and rose to his feet. "I trust the drive has whetted your appetite, Warburton, for honest Chadber will be monstrous hurt an you do not justice to his capons." "I shall endeavor to spare his feelings," replied the lawyer with a twinkle, and seated himself at the table. Whatever might be Mr. Chadber's failings, he possessed an excellent cook. Mr. Warburton dined very well, beginning on a fat duck, and continuing through the many courses that constituted the meal. When the table was cleared, the servant gone, and the port before them, he endeavored to guide the conversation back into the previous channels. But he reckoned without my lord, and presently found himself discussing the pretender's late rebellion. He sat up suddenly. "There were rumors that you were with the prince, sir." Carstares set down his glass in genuine amazement. "I? Indeed, yes. I do not know whence the rumor came, but it reached Wyncham. My lord said naught, but I think Mr. Richard hardly credited it."
"I should hope not. Why should they think me turned rebel, pray?" Mr. Warburton frowned. "Rebel, sir?" "Rebel, Mr. Warburton. I have served under His Majesty." The Carstares were ever Tories, Master Jack, true to their rightful king. "My dear Warburton, I owe naught to the Stuart princes. I was born in King George I's reign, and I protest I am a good Whig." Warburton shook his head disapprovingly. "There has never been a Whig in the Wyncham family, sir." "And you hope there never will be again, eh? What of Dick? Is he faithful to the Pretender?" "I think Mr. Richard does not interest himself in politics, sir." Carstares raised his eyebrows, and there fell a silence. After a minute or two Mr. Warburton cleared his throat. I suppose, sir, you have no idea of, discontinuing your, profession?" My lord gave an irrepressible little laugh. "Faith, Mr. Warburton, I've only just begun." "Only but a year ago, Mr. Richard." "I held him up. But to tell the truth, sir, I've not done much since then." "Then, sir, you are not, notorious?" "Good gad, no. Notorious, forsooth. Confess, Warburton, you thought me some heroic figure? Gentleman Harry, perhaps?" Warburton blushed. "Well, sir, I wondered." "I shall have to disappoint you, I perceive. I doubt Bow Street has never heard of me, and to tell the truth, 'tis not an occupation which appeals vastly to my senses." "Then why, my lord, do you continue?" "I must have some excuse for roaming the country," pleaded Jack. "I could not be idle." "You are not compelled to, rob, my lord?" Carstares wrinkled his brow inquiringly. "Compelled? I take your meaning. No, Warburton, I have enough for my wants, now. Time was, but that is past. I rob for amusement's sake." Warburton looked steadily across at him. "I am surprised, my lord, that you, a Carstares, should find it amusing." John was silent for a moment, and when he at length spoke it was defiantly and with a bitterness most unusual in him. "The world, Mr. Warburton, has not treated me so kindly that I should feel any qualms of conscience. But, and it gives you any satisfaction to know it, I will tell you that my robberies are few and far between. You spoke a little while ago of my probable fate on Tyburn Tree. I think you need not fear to hear of that." It gives me great satisfaction, my lord, I confess," stammered the lawyer, and found nothing more to say. After a long pause he again produced the bulky roll of parchment and laid it down before the Earl with the apologetic murmur of, "Business, my lord." Carstares descended from the clouds and eyed the packet with evident distaste. He proceeded to fill his and his companion's glass very leisurely. That done, he heaved a lugubrious sigh, caught Mr. Warburton's eye, laughed in answer to its quizzical gleam, and broke the seal. "Since you will have it, sir, business." Mr. Warburton stayed the night at the Chequers and travelled back to Wyncham next day by the 2 o'clock coach. He played piquet and écarté with my lord all the evening, and then retired to bed, not having found an opportunity to argue his mission as he had hoped to do. Whenever he had tried to turn the conversation that way, he had been gently but firmly led into safer channels, and somehow had found it impossible to get back. My lord was the gayest and most charming of companions, but talk business he would not. He regaled the lawyer with spicy anecdotes and tales of abroad, but never once allowed Mr. Warburton to speak of his home or of his brother. The lawyer retired to rest in a measure reassured by the other's good spirits, but at the same time dispirited by his failure to induce Carstares to return to Wyncham. Next morning, although he was not up until 12, he was before my lord, who only appeared in time for lunch, which was served as before in the oak parlour. He entered the room in his usual leisurely yet decided fashion and made Mr. Warburton a marvellous leg. Then he bore him off to inspect his mare, Jenny, of whom he was inordinately proud. By the time they returned to the parlour, luncheon was served, and Mr. Warburton realised that he had scarcely any time left in which to plead his cause. My lord's servant hovered continually about the room, waiting on them, until his master bade him go to attend to the lawyer's valise. When the door had closed on his retreating form, Carstares leaned back in his chair, and, with a rather dreary little smile, turned to his companion. "You want to reason with me, I know, Mr. Warburton, and, indeed, I will listen and I must. But I would so much rather that you left the subject alone, believe me." Warburton sensed the finality in his voice, and wisely threw away his last chance. "I understand 'tis painful, my lord, and I will say no more. Only remember and think on it, I beg." The concern in his face touched my lord. "You are too good to me, Mr. Warburton, I vow. I can only say that I appreciate your kindness and your forbearance. And I trust that you will forgive my seeming churlishness and believe that I am indeed grateful to you." "I wish I might do more for you, Master Jack," stammered Warburton, made miserable by the wistful note in his favourite's voice. There was no time for more, the coach already awaited him, and his valise had been hoisted up. As they stood together in the porch, he could only grip my lord's hand tightly and say goodbye. Then he got hurriedly into the coach, and the door was slammed behind him. My lord made his leg, and watched the heavy vehicle move forward and roll away down the street. Then with a stifled sigh he turned and walked towards the stables. His servant saw him coming and went at once to meet him. "The mare, sir?" "As you say, Jim, the mare. In an hour." He turned and would have strolled back. "Sir, your honour." He paused, looking over his shoulder. "Well?" "They're on the lookout, sir. Best be careful." "They always are, Jim. But thanks." Ye wouldn't take me with ye, sir," pleadingly. "Take you? Faith, no. I've no mind to lead you into danger. And you serve me best by remaining to carry out my orders." The man fell back. Sir, but. There are none, Jim." "No, sir, but ye will have a care." "I will be the most cautious of men." He walked away on the word, and passed into the house. In an hour he was a very different being. Gone was the emerald ring, the foppish cane, the languid air, too, had disappeared, leaving him brisk and businesslike. He was dressed for riding, with buff coat and buckskin breeches, and shining top boots. A sober brown wig replaced the powdered creation, and a black tricorn was set rakishly atop. He stood in the deserted porch, watching Jim strap his baggage to the saddle, occasionally giving a curt direction. Presently Mr. Chadber appeared with the stirrup cup, which he drained and handed back with a word of thanks and a guinea at the bottom. Someone called lustily from within, and the landlord, bowing very low, murmured apologies and vanished. Jim cast a last glance at the saddle girths, and, leaving the mare quietly standing in the road, came up to his master with gloves and whip. Carstares took them silently and fell to tapping his boot, his eyes thoughtfully on the man's face. "You will hire a coach, as usual," he said at length, "and take my baggage to," he paused, frowning, "Lewis. You will engage a room at the White Hart and order dinner. I shall wear apricot and H.M. blue, sir," ventured Jim, with an idea of being helpful. His master's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You are a humorist, Salter. Apricot and cream. Cream. Yes, 'tis a pleasing thought, cream. That is all, Jenny." The mare turned her head, whinnying as he came towards her. "Good lass." He mounted lightly and patted her glossy neck. Then he leaned sideways in the saddle to speak again to Salter, who stood beside him, one hand on the bridle. "The cloak." "Behind you, sir." "My wig." "Yes, sir." "Pistols." "Ready primed, sir." "Good. I shall be in Lewis in time for dinner, with luck." "Yes, sir. Ye will have a care," anxiously. "Have I not told you?" He straightened in the saddle, touched the mare with his heel, and bestowing a quick smile and a nod on his man, trotted easily away. 2. My Lord at the White Hart. Sir Anthony Ferndale sat before the dressing-table in his room at the White Hart, idly polishing his nails. A gorgeous silk dressing gown lay over the back of his chair, and, behind him, Jim was attending to his wig, at the same time hovering anxiously over the coat and waistcoat that were waiting to be donned. Carstares left off polishing his nails, yawned, and leaned back in his chair, a slim, graceful figure in cambric shirt and apricot satin breeches. He studied his cravat for some moments in the mirror, and lifted a hand to it. Salter held his breath. With extreme deliberation the hand moved a diamond and emerald pin the fraction of an inch to one side, and fell to his side again. Salter drew a relieved breath, which brought his master's eyes round to himself. "No trouble, Jim?" "None at all, sir." "Neither had I. 'Twas most surprisingly easy. The birds had no more fight in them than sparrows. 2 men in a coach, one a bullying rascal of a merchant, the other his clerk. Gad! But I was sorry for that little man." He paused, his hand on the rouge pot. Salter looked an inquiry. "Yes," nodded Carstares. "Very sorry. The fat man would appear to bully and browbeat him after the manner of his kind. He even blamed him for my advent, the greasy coward. Yes, Jim, you are right, he did not appeal to me, Cem Fudby. So, ingenuously, I relieved him of his cash-box and 200 guineas. A present for the poor of Lewis." Jim jerked his shoulder, frowning. "If ye give away all ye get, sir, why do ye rob at all?" he asked bluntly. His whimsical little smile played about my lord's mouth. "'Tis an object for my life, Jim, a noble object. And I believe it amuses me to play Robin Hood, take from the rich to give to the poor," he added, for Salter's benefit. "But to return to my victims, you would have laughed had you but seen my little man come tumbling out of the coach when I opened the door." "Tumble, sir? Why should he do that?" He was at pains to explain the reason. "It seems he had been commanded to hold the door to prevent my entering, so when I jerked it open, sooner than loose his hold, he fell out onto the road. Of course, I apologized most abjectly and we had some conversation. Quite a nice little man. It made me laugh to see him sprawling on the road, though. Wish I could have seen it, your honour. I would ha' liked fine to ha' been beside ye." He looked down at the lithe form with some pride. "I'd give something to see ye hold up a coach, sir." Haresfoot in hand, Jack met his admiring eyes in the glass, and laughed. "I make no doubt you would. I have cultivated a superb voice, a trifle thick and beery, a little loud, perhaps, something to dream of o' nights. I doubt they do, too," he added reflectively, and affixed the patch at the corner of his mouth. So, a little low, you think? But 'twill suffice, what's toward. Down below in the street there was a great stirring and bustling, horses' hoofs, shouts from the ostlers, and the sound of wheels on the cobblestones. Jim went to the window and looked down, craning his neck to see over the balcony. "'Tis a coach arrived, sir." "That much had I gathered," replied my lord, busy with the powder. "Yes, sir. O lord, sir." He was shaken with laughter. "What now?" "'Tis the curiousest sight, sir. 2 gentlemen, one fat and t'other small. One's all shriveled looking, like a spider, while t'other resembles a hippopotamus, particularly in the face." "Well, yes, sir. He do rather. And he be wearing purple." "Heavens, yes, purple, and an orange waistcoat." Jim peered afresh. "So it is, sir. But how did you know?" Even as he put the question, understanding flashed into Jim's eyes. "I rather think that I have had the honor of meeting these gentlemen," replied my lord placidly. "My buckle, Jim. Is-t-he a prodigious great coach with wheels picked out in yellow?" Your honor. The gentlemen seem a bit put out, too." "That is quite probable. Does the smaller gentleman wear somewhat mudded garments?" "I can't see, sir. He stands behind the fat gentleman." "Mr. Bumblebee." "Jim." "Sir." Jim turned quickly at the sound of the sharp voice. He found that my lord had risen, and was holding up a waistcoat of pea-green pattern on a bilious yellow ground, between a disgusted finger and thumb. Before his severe frown Jim dropped his eyes and stood looking for all the world like a schoolboy detected in some crime. "You put this monstrosity out for me to wear," in awful tones. Jim eyed the waistcoat gloomily and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Did I not specify cream ground?" "Yes, sir. I thought that 'twas cream." "My good friend, it is, I cannot say what it is. And pea green," he shuddered. "Remove it." Jim hurried forward and disposed of the offending garment. "And bring me the broidered satin." "Yes, that is it. It is particularly pleasing to the eye." "Yes, sir," agreed the abashed Jim. "You are excused this time," added my lord, with a twinkle in his eye. "What are our 2 friends doing?" Salter went back to the window. "They've gone into the house, sir. No, here's the spider gentleman. He do seem in a hurry, your honor." "Ah," murmured his lordship. "You may assist me into this coat. Thanks." With no little difficulty, my lord managed to enter into the fine satin garment, which, when on, seemed molded to his back, so excellently did it fit. He shook out his ruffles and slipped the emerald ring onto his finger with a slight frown. "I believe I shall remain here some few days," he remarked presently, "to allay suspicion." He looked across at his man as he spoke, through his lashes. It was not in Jim's nature to inquire into his master's affairs, much less to be surprised at anything he might do or say. He was content to receive and promptly execute his orders, and to worship Carstares with a dog-like devotion, following blindly in his wake, happy as long as he might serve him. Carstares had found him in France, very down upon his luck, having been discharged from the service of his late master owing to the penniless condition of that gentleman's pocket. He had engaged him as his own personal servant, and the man had remained with him ever since, proving an invaluable acquisition to my Lord John. Despite a singularly wooden countenance, he was by no means a fool, and he had helped Carstares out of more than one tight corner during his inglorious and foolhardy career as highwayman. He probably understood his somewhat erratic master better than anyone else, and he now divined what was in his mind. He returned that glance with a significant wink. "'Twas them gentlemen ye held up today, sir?" he asked, jerking an expressive thumb towards the window. Mr. Bumblebee and friend. It would almost appear so. I think I do not fully appreciate Mr. Bumblebee. I find his conduct rather tiresome. But it is just possible that he thinks the same of me. I will further my acquaintance with him." Jim grunted scornfully, and an inquiring eye was cocked at him. "You do not admire our friend? Pray, do not judge him by his exterior. He may possess a beautiful mind. But I do not think so. And no, I really do not think so." He chuckled a little. "Do you know, Jim, I believe I am going to enjoy myself tonight." "I don't doubt it, Your Honor. 'Twere child's play to trick the fat gentleman." "Probably. But it is not with the fat gentleman that I shall have to deal. 'Tis with all the officials of this charming town, and I mistake not. Do I hear the small spider returning?" Salter stepped back to the window. Sir, with 3 others." "Precisely. Be so good as to hand me my snuff-box. And my cane. Thank you. I feel the time has now come for me to put in an appearance. Pray, bear in mind that I am new come from France and journey by easy stages to London. And cultivate a stupid expression. Yes, that will do excellently." Jim grinned delightedly. He had assumed no expression of stupidity, and was consequently much pleased with this pleasantry. He swung open the door with an air, and watched Sir Anthony mince along the passage to the stairs. In the coffee room the city merchant, Mr. Fudby by name, was relating the story of his wrongs, with many an impressive pause, and much emphasis, to the mayor, town clerk, and beadle of Lewes. All 3 had been fetched by Mr. Chilter, his clerk, in obedience to his orders, for the bigger the audience the better pleased was Mr. Fudby. He was now enjoying himself quite considerably, despite the loss of his precious cash-box. So was not Mr. Hedges, the mayor. He was a fussy little man who suffered from dyspepsia. He was not interested in the affair, and he did not see what was to be done for Mr. Fudby. Further, he had been hailed from his dinner, and he was hungry, and, above all, he found Mr. Fudby very unattractive. Still, a high-road robbery was serious matter enough, and some course of action must be thought out, so he listened to the story with an assumption of interest, looking exceedingly wise, and, at the proper moments, uttering sounds betokening concern. The more he saw and heard of Mr. Fudby, the less he liked him. Neither did the town clerk care for him. There was that about Mr. Fudby that did not endear him to his fellow men, especially when they chanced to be his inferiors in the social scale. The beadle did not think much about anything. Having decided, and rightly, that the affair had nothing whatever to do with him, he leaned back in his chair and stared stolidly up at the ceiling. The tale Mr. Fudby was telling bore surprisingly little resemblance to the truth. It was a much embellished version, in which he himself had behaved with quite remarkable gallantry. It had been gradually concocted during the journey to Lewes. He was still holding forth when my lord entered the room. Carstares raised his glass languidly to survey the assembled company, bowed slightly, and walked over to the fire. He seated himself in an armchair and took no further notice of anybody. Mr. Hedges had recognized at a glance that here was some grand seigneur and wished that Mr. Fudby would not speak in so loud a voice. But that individual, delighted at having a new auditor, continued his tale with much relish and in a still louder tone. My lord yawned delicately and took a pinch of snuff. Yes, fussed Mr. Hedges. But, short of sending to London for the runners, I do not see what I can do. If I send to London, it must, of course, be at your expense, sir. Mr. Fudby bristled. At my expense, sir? Do ye say at my expense? I am surprised. I repeat, I am surprised. Indeed, sir? I can order the town crier out, describing the horse, and offering a reward for the capture of any man on such an animal. But, he shrugged and looked across at the town clerk, I do not imagine that 'twould be of much use, Mr. Brand? The clerk pursed his lips and spread out his hands. I fear not. I very much fear not. I would advise Mr. Fudby to have a proclamation posted up round the country. He sat back with the air of one who has contributed his share to the work, and does not intend to offer any more help. Ho, growled Mr. Fudby. He blew out his cheeks. 'Twill be a grievous expense, though I suppose it must be done, and I cannot but feel that if it had not been for your deplorably cowardly conduct, Chilter, yes, cowardly conduct, I say, I might never have been robbed of my 200. He snuffled a little, and eyed the flushed but silent Chilter with mingled reproach and scorn. However, my coachman assures me he could swear to the horse again, although he cannot remember much about the man himself. Chilter, how did he describe the horse?
Oh, chestnut, Mr. Fudby, chestnut, with a half-moon of white on its forehead, and one white foreleg. Jack perceived that it was time he took a hand in the game. He half-turned in his chair and levelled his quizzing glass at Mr. Chilter. I beg your pardon, he drawled. Mr. Fudby's eye brightened. The fine gentleman was roused to an expression of interest at last. He launched forth into his story once more for my lord's benefit. Carstares eyed him coldly, seeing which, Mr. Hedges came hurriedly to the rescue. Yes, Mr. Fudby, quite so. Your pardon, sir, I have not the honour of knowing your name? Ferndale, supplied Jack, Sir Anthony Ferndale. Yes, Mr. Hedges bowed. Pray pardon my importuning you with our. Not at all, said my lord. No, quite so. The fact is, these, gentlemen have had the, misfortune to be waylaid on their journey here. Sir Anthony's glass was again levelled at the group. His expression betokened mild surprise. All these gentlemen, he inquired blandly. Dear, dear. Oh, no, 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 sir. Not all, only Mr. Fudby, said that worthy, and discovered that Sir Anthony was bowing frigidly. At once he rose, and resting his knuckles on the table before him, bent his body slowly and painfully. Sir Anthony inclined his head. Whereupon, to the delight of all the rest, Mr. Fudby bowed again with even greater stateliness than before. Mr. Hedges observed Sir Anthony's lips to twitch convulsively. He waited for Mr. Fudby to subside, and then continued. Yes, Mr. Fudby and Mr. My clerk, snapped Fudby. Sir Anthony favoured Mr. Chilter with his peculiarly sweet smile, and turned again to Mr. Hedges. I see. A daylight robbery, you say? Broad daylight, boomed Mr. Fudby. Yes, yes, interposed the mayor, fearing a fresh outbreak from that quarter. I wonder if you have seen anything of such an animal as Mr. Chilter described. 'Tis a most extraordinary thing, said Carstares slowly, but I have just bought such an one. He glanced round with an inquiring smile and one eyebrow lifted. Well, ejaculated Mr. Fudby. Well. Dear me, sir, what a strange coincidence. May I ask where you bought it, and from whom? She has not been in my possession over 2 hours. I bought her from an out-at-elbows ruffian, on my way hither. I thought at one time that 'twas strange that the man should possess such a mare purebred, I vow, and wondered why he was so eager to be rid of her. He was eager because he knew he would be recognized by her, explained Mr. Fudby kindly. Without doubt. Perhaps you would like to see her. I will send my man. Oh no, no, cried the mayor. We would not dream of so inconveniencing you. 'Twere a pleasure, bowed Jack, devoutly hoping that Mr. Fudby would not require to see Jenny, who, he felt sure, would betray him by her very evident affection. No, no, Sir Anthony, 'tis quite unnecessary, I assure you, but I thank you for all that. Mr. Fudby, if you would describe the man himself, I will see to the proclamation. Describe him, Chilter, ordered Mr. Fudby, who was becoming rather grumpy. Mr. Chilter smiled suddenly. Certainly, sir, he said with alacrity. 'Twas a great ruffianly fellow, monstrous tall. How tall? Interrupted the town clerk. 6 feet. Oh, quite, lied Mr. Chilter. And fat. Jack's shoulders shook. Fat, you say? He asked gently. Very fat, affirmed Mr. Chilter. And prodigious rough, swearing dreadfully in his speech. You could not see his face, I suppose. Mr. Chilter hesitated. I could see his mouth and chin, he said, and I remarked a long scar running from his underlip to the bottom of his face. Involuntarily Carstares' hand caressed his perfectly smooth chin. Either the little clerk was a born romancer, or for some reason or other he did not want the highwayman to be taken. Well, Sir Anthony, the mayor was saying. Does that description fit your man? My lord frowned thoughtfully. Tall, he said slowly, and fat, you said fat, I think, Mr. Chilter? Rather anxiously Mr. Chilter reiterated this statement. Ah. And with a long scar, yes, that is undoubtedly he. Furthermore, he added audaciously, he has a squint in his left eye. 'Tis a most ill-favoured rogue in all. It would appear so, Sir Anthony, remarked the mayor dryly. He did not in the least believe the story of the squint, and imagined that the fine court gentleman was amusing himself at their expense. Nevertheless, he had no intention of remonstrating, the sooner he could withdraw from this very tiresome affair the better. So he gravely took down all the absurd particulars, remarked that the man should be easy to find, and made ready to depart. The town clerk rose, and tapped the beadle on the shoulder, whereupon that worthy, with a grunt, abandoned his pose of masterly inactivity and followed the mayor out of the room. Mr. Fudby rose. I doubt I shall never see my money again, he said pettishly. If you, Chilter, had not been so. Allow me to offer you some snuff, Mr. Chilter, interposed my lord gently, extending his jewelled box. Doubtless, sir, you would wish to see my mare? I know naught of horses, snorted Mr. Fudby. 'Tis my clerk who appears to have remarked all the details. He sneered terrifically. Then pray, do me the honour of walking as far as the stables, Mr. Chilter. 'Twere as well to be certain about the mare. Mr. R. Fudby, your servant. And now, Mr. Chilter, I have a grudge against you, said Carstares, as they walked across the little garden. Me, sir? Oh, have you, Sir Anthony? He looked up and perceived that the gentleman was laughing. Yes, Mr. Chilter, a very serious grudge. You have described me as fat. Chilter nearly fainted. You, sir, he gasped, and stared in amazement. Also that I swear dreadfully in my speech, and that I have a scar running from my mouth to my chin. Mr. Chilter stood stock still in the middle of the path. It was you, sir, all the time? You held us up. Were you the man who wrenched open the door? I was that infamous scoundrel. I beg leave once more to apologize for my carelessness in opening that same door. Now tell me, why did you take such pains to throw dust in their sleepy eyes? They resumed their walk slowly. The little clerk flushed. I scarce know, sir, save that I liked you, and Anne. I see. 'Twas prodigious good of you, Mr. Chilter. I wonder if there is anything that I can do to show my gratitude. Again the clerk flushed and lifted his head proudly. I thank you, sir, but there is naught. By now they had reached the stable. Carstares opened the door and they entered. Then will you accept this in token of my regard, sir? Mr. Chilter gazed at the emerald ring that glowed and winked at him from the palm of my lord's hand. He looked up into the blue eyes and stammered a little. Indeed, sir, I. 'Tis honestly come by, pleadingly. Come, Mr. Chilter, you'll not hurt my feelings by refusing. You will keep it in remembrance of a fat man, Mr. Chilter, who rudely jerked you onto the road? The clerk took it with unsteady fingers. I thank you most. Nay, I beg of you. 'Tis I thank you for aiding me so kindly. Come and see my Jenny. Well, lass? For the mare at the first sound of his voice had turned in her loose box, and was whinnying and pawing the ground eagerly. I do not understand, sir, anything, how it is that you are highwayman, or why you have honored me with your confidence, why you should trust me. But, thank you. As he spoke, Mr. Chilter placed his hand in my lord's, and for the second time in his life, felt the pressure of those firm, kindly fingers. Why, your honor? You've lost your emerald. No, Jim. I gave it away.
Ye gave it away, sir? To the small spider. But. And he called me fat, too. Called ye fat, sir? Asked the man, bewildered. Yes. Very fat. By the way, let me tell you that I bought Jenny at Fittering today from the naughty ruffian who waylaid Mr. Bumblebee. He proceeded to give Jim a sketch of what had transpired below. When he had finished, the man shook his head severely. I doubt you'll never learn wisdom, sir, he scolded. What have I done? What did you want to tell it all to the Spider-Man for, sir? 'Twas most incautious of ye. Like as not, he'll split to the fat gentleman, and we'll have the whole town at our heels. Which just shows all you know of the small spider, replied his master calmly. Hand me the powder. 3. Introducing the Honourable Richard Carstares. Wyncham. A stately old house with mullioned windows, standing high on its stone terraces, half covered by creepers, a house surrounded by lawns, rolling down on the one side to a river that rippled and murmured its way along beneath overhanging trees and a blue sky, over boulders and rocks, so clear and sparkling that the myriad pebbles could be seen deep down on its bed. In the other direction, the velvet lawns stretched away till they met the orchards and the quiet meadowland. On two sides the house had its terraces, very white in the sunshine, with stone steps leading down to a miniature lake where water lilies grew, and where the tiny fish darted to and fro unconcernedly. Flagged walks there were, running between flower beds a riot of colour, and solemn old trees that had stood there through all the years. Cool woodland lay beyond the little river, carpeted with dark moss, where in spring the primroses grew. So thick was the foliage of the trees that the sun but penetrated in uneven patches. Up the terrace walls crept roses, yellow and red, pink and white, and tossed their trailing sprays across the parapet. Over the walls of the house they climbed, mingling with purple clematis, jasmine, and sickly honeysuckle. The air was heavy with their united perfumes, while, wafted from a bed below, came the smoky scent of lavender. The old house seemed half asleep, basking in the sunlight. Save for a peacock preening its feathers on the terrace steps, there was no sign of life. The old place had harboured generations of Carstares. Earl had succeeded Earl and reigned supreme, and it was only now that there was no Earl living there. No one knew where he was. Scarce a month ago one died, but the eldest son was not there to take his place. For 6 years he had been absent, and none dared breathe his name, for he disgraced that name, and the old Earl cast him off and forbade all mention of him. But the poor folk of the countryside remembered him. They would tell one another tales of his reckless courage, his sweet smile and his winning ways, his light-heartedness and his never-failing kindness and good humour. What a rider he was! To see him sit his horse! What a swordsman! Do you mind the time he fought young Mr. Welsh over yonder in the spinney with half the countryside watching? Ah, he was a one, was Master Jack. Do ye mind how he knocked the sword clean out o' Mr.
Welsh's hand, and then stood waiting for him to pick it up? And do ye mind the way his eyes sparkled, and how he laughed, just for the sheer joy o' living? Endless anecdotes would they tell, and the old gaffers would shake their heads and sigh, and long for the sight of him again. And they would jerk their thumbs towards the manor and shrug their old shoulders significantly. Who wanted Mr. Richard for squire? Not they, at least. They knew he was a good squire and a kindly man, but give them Master John, who would laugh and crack a joke and never wear the glum looks that Mr. Richard affected. In the house, Richard Carstares paced to and fro in his library, every now and again pausing to glance wretchedly up at the portrait of his brother hanging over his desk. The artist had managed to catch the expression of those blue eyes, and they smiled down at Richard in just the way that John was always wont to smile, so gaily, and withal so wistfully. Richard was 29, but already he looked twice his age. He was very thin, and there were deep lines on his good-looking countenance. His grey eyes bore a haunted, careworn look, and his mouth, though well-shaped, was curiously lacking in determination. He was dressed soberly, and without that touch of smartness that had characterized him 6 years ago. He wore black in memory of his father, and it may have been that severity, only relieved by the lace at his throat, that made his face appear so prematurely aged. There was none of his brother's boyishness about him, even his smile seemed forced and tired, and his laughter rarely held merriment.
He pulled out his chronometer, comparing it with the clock on the mantelpiece. His pacing took him to the door, and almost nervously he pulled it open, listening. No sound came to his ears. Back again, to and fro across the room, eagerly awaiting the clanging of a bell. It did not come, but presently a footfall sounded on the passage without, and someone knocked at the door. In 2 strides Richard was by it, and had flung it wide. Warburton stood there. Richard caught his hand. Warburton, at last. I have been waiting this hour and more. Mr. Warburton disengaged himself, bowing. I regret I was not able to come before, sir, he said primly. I make no doubt you travelled back as quickly as possible. Come in, sir. He led the lawyer into the room and shut the door. Sit down, Warburton, sit down. You found my brother? Again Warburton bowed. I had the felicity of seeing his lordship, sir. He was well, in good spirits. You thought him changed, yes. Aged perhaps, or... His lordship was not greatly changed, sir. Richard almost stamped in his impatience. Come, Warburton, come, tell me everything. What did he say? Will he take the revenues? Will he? His lordship, sir, was reluctant to take anything, but upon maturer consideration, he consented to accept his elder son's portion. The revenues of the estate he begs you will make use of. But you told him that I would touch naught belonging to him. I tried to persuade his lordship, sir. To no avail. He desires you to use Wyncham as you will. I'll not touch his money. Warburton gave the faintest of shrugs. That is as you please, sir. Something in the suave voice made Richard, from his stand by the desk, glance sharply down at the lawyer. Suspicion flashed into his eyes. He seemed about to speak, when Warburton continued. I believe I may set your mind at rest on one score, Mr. Carstares. His lordship's situation is tolerably comfortable. He has ample means. But he lives by robbery. Warburton's thin lips curled a little. Does he not? Persisted Carstares. So he would have us believe, sir. 'Tis true. He waylaid me. And robbed you, sir? Rob me? He could not rob his own brother, Warburton. Your pardon, Mr. Carstares, you are right. His lordship could not rob a brother. Yet have I known a man do such a thing? For a long minute there was no word spoken. The suspicion that had dwelt latent in Carstares' eyes sprang up again. Some of the colour drained from his cheeks, and twice he passed his tongue between his lips. The fingers of his hand, gripping a chair back, opened and shut spasmodically. Rather feverishly his eyes searched the lawyer's face, questioning. John told you, he started, and floundered hopelessly. His lordship told me nothing, sir. He was singularly reticent. But there was nothing he could tell me that I did not already know. What do you mean, Warburton? Why do you look at me like that? Why do you fence with me? In plain words, What do you mean? Warburton rose, clenching his hands. I know you, Master Richard, for what you are. Ah! Carstares flung out his hand as if to ward off a blow. Another tense silence. With a great effort Warburton controlled himself, and once more the mask of impassivity seemed to descend upon him. After that one tortured cry Richard became calm again. He sat down, on his face a look almost of relief, coming after a great strain. You learnt the truth, from John. He will expose me? No, sir. I have not learnt it from him. And he will never expose you. Richard turned his head. His eyes, filled now with a species of dull pain, looked full into Warburton's. Oh, he said. Then you. Nor I, sir. I have pledged my word to his lordship. I would not speak all these years for your father's sake, now it is for his. He choked. You are fond of John? Still the apathetic, weary voice. Fond of him? Good God, Master Dick, I love him. And I, said Richard, very low. He received no reply, and looked up. You don't believe me? Once, sir, I was certain of it. Now, he shrugged. Yet 'tis true, Warburton. I would give all in my power to undo that night's work. You cannot expect me to believe that, sir. It rests with you alone whether his name be cleared or not. And you remain silent. Warburton, do you think it means nothing to me that John is outcast? Before the misery in those grey eyes some of Warburton's severity fell away from him. Master Richard, I want to think the best I can of you. Master Jack would tell me nothing. Can you not explain how it came that you allowed him to bear the blame of your cheat? Richard shuddered. There's no explanation, no excuse. I forced it on him. On Jack, my brother, because I was mad for love of Lavinia. Oh, my God, the thought of it is driving me crazy. I thought I could forget, and then I met him. The sight of him brought it all back to me. Ever since that day I have not known how to live and not shriek the truth to everyone, and I never shall. I never shall. Tell me, sir, pleaded Warburton, touched in spite of himself. Richard's head sunk into his hands. The whole scene is a nightmare. I think I must have been mad. I scarce knew what I was about. Gently, sir. Remember I know hardly anything. What induced you to mark the cards? That debt to Gundry. My father would not meet it. I had to find the money. I could not face the scandal. I tell you I was mad for Lavinia. I could think of naught else. I ceased to care for John because I thought him in love with her. I could not bear to think of the disgrace which would take her from me. Then that night at Dares. I was losing. I knew I could not pay. Gad. But I can see my notes of hand under Millward's elbow. Growing. Jack had played Millward before me, and he had won. I remember they laughed at him, saying his luck had turned at last, for he always lost at cards. Millward and I played with the same pack that they had used. There was another table, I think. Dare was dicing with Fitzgerald, someone was playing faro with Jack behind me. I heard Jack say his luck was out again, I heard them laugh. And all the time I was losing. The pin of my cravat fell out onto my knee. I think no one saw it. As I picked it up the thought that I should mark the cards seemed to flash into my mind. Oh, it was despicable, I know. I held the ace of clubs in my hand, I scratched it with that pin in one corner. It was easily done. By degrees I marked all 4, and 3 of the kings. No one noticed, but I was nervous, I dared do no more. I replaced that pin. Soon I began to win, not very much. Then Tracy Belmanoir came across the room to watch our play. From that moment everything seemed to go awry. It was the beginning of the trouble. Tracy stood behind me watching. I could feel him there, like some black moth, hovering. I don't know how long he stayed like that, it seemed hours. I could feel his eyes. I could have shrieked, I'll swear my hands were trembling. Suddenly he moved. I had played the ace of hearts. He said, one moment, in that soft, sinister voice of his. Millward was surprised. I tried to tell myself that Devil had noticed nothing. The mark on that card was so faint that I could scarce see it myself. I thought it impossible that he, a mere onlooker, should discover it. He stepped forward. I remember he brushed my shoulder. I remember how the light caught the diamonds he was wearing. I think my brain was numbed. I could only repeat to myself, extravagant devil, and stare at those winking jewels. Then I thought, he is Lavinia's brother, but I do not like him. I do not like him, little foolish things like that, and my throat was dry, parched. He bent over the table, stretched out his white hand, turned over the ace, lifted his quizzing glass, and stared down at the card. Then he dropped the glass and drew out his snuff box. It had Aphrodite enameled on the lid. I remember it so distinctly. I heard Tracy ask Millward to examine the ace. I wanted to spring up and strangle him. I could scarce keep my hands still. Richard paused. He drew his hand across his eyes, shuddering. Millward saw the scratch. He cried out that the cards were marked. Suddenly everyone seemed to be gathered about our table, all talking. Jack had his hand on my shoulder. He and Dare were running through the pack. But all the while I could look at no one but Tracy Andover. He seemed so sinister, so threatening, in those black clothes of his. His eyes were almost shut, his face so white. And he was looking at me. He seemed to be reading my very soul. For an instant I thought he knew. I wanted to shout out that he was wrong. I wanted to shriek to him to take his eyes away. Heaven knows what I should have done. But he looked away at Jack, with that sneering smile on his damned mask of a face. I could have killed him for that smile. I think Jack understood it. He dropped the cards, staring at Tracy. Everyone was watching them. No one looked at me. If they had, they must surely have learnt the truth. But they were hanging on Andover's lips, looking from him to Jack and back again. I remember Fitzgerald dropped his handkerchief. I was absurdly interested in that. I was wondering why he did not pick it up, when Andover spoke again. And Carstares' luck turned. Like that, Warburton, with just that faint, questioning in his voice. Before Jack could speak there was an outcry. Dare cried shame to Andover. They laughed at him, as well they might. But I saw them exchange glances. They were wondering. It was suspicious that Jack should have had that run of luck and that he should lose as soon as he left that table. Millward, poor, silly Millward, gaped at Tracy and stuttered that surely 'twas another pack we had used. I could hardly breathe. Then Andover corrected him. How did he know? No one else remembered, or thought of noticing, only he. I can see Jack now, standing there so stiffly, with his head thrown up, and those blue eyes of his flashing. "Do I understand you to accuse me, Belmanoir?" he said. Oh, but he was furious. Tracy never said a word. Only his eyes just flickered to my face and away again. Jack's hand was gripping my shoulder hard. I could feel his anger. Dare called out that the suggestion was preposterous. That John should cheat. Tracy asked him if the cards were his. Gad! I can hear his soft, mocking voice now. Dare went purple. You know his way, Warburton. "Opened in your presence on this table," he cried. "By Carstares," smiled Tracy. It was true. But why should Tracy remember it, and none other? They stared at him, amazed. Dare turned to Jack for corroboration. He nodded. I think he never looked haughtier. You know how fond of Jack Dare was. He tried to bluster it off, tried to get control over the affair. It was to no avail. We were puppets, worked by that devil, Belmanoir. One man managing that ghastly scene. He pointed out that only 3 of us had used that pack. Jack, Millward, and I. Jack laughed. "Next you will accuse Dick," he snapped scornfully. "One of you, certainly," smiled Andover. "Or Millward." Then everyone realized that one of us 3 must have marked the cards. Millward was upset. But no one suspected him. It was Jack or me. As long as I live, I shall never forget the horror of those moments. If I were exposed, it meant the end of everything between Lavinia and me. I tell you, Warburton, I would have committed any sin at that moment. Nothing would have been too black. I could not bear to lose her. You don't know what she meant to me. I can guess, sir, said the lawyer, gravely. No, no. No one could imagine the depths of my love for her. I think not even Jack. I felt his hand leave my shoulder. The truth had dawned on him. I heard the way the breath hissed between his teeth as he realized. Somehow I got to my feet, clutching at the table, facing him. I don't excuse myself, I know my conduct was beyond words dastardly. I looked across at him, just said his name, as though I could scarce believe my ears. So all those watching thought. But Jack knew better. He knew I was imploring him to save me. He understood all that I was trying to convey to him. For an instant he stared at me. I thought, God forgive me. I prayed that he might take the blame on himself. Then he smiled. Coward though I was, when I saw that hurt, wistful little smile on his lips, I nearly blurted out the whole truth. Not quite. I suppose I was too mean-spirited for that.
Jack bowed to the room and again to Dare. He said, I owe you an apology, sir. Dare sprang forward, catching him by the shoulder, crying out that it could not be true. When Jack laughed, he fell away from him as from the plague. And all of them. My God, to see them drawing away, not looking at Jack. And Jack's face, growing paler and harder, every moment. All his friends, turning their backs to him. Davenant, even Jim Davenant, walked away to the fireplace with Evans. I could not look at Jack. I dared not. I could not go to him, stand by him. I had not the right. I had to leave him there in the middle of the room alone. The awful hurt in his eyes made me writhe. The room was whirling round, I felt sick, I know. I fell back into my chair, hiding my face. I hardly cared whether they suspected me or not. But they did not. They knew how great was the love between us, and they were not surprised that I broke down. I heard Andover's soft voice, he was telling some tale to Dare. Oh, they were well bred, those men. They skimmed over the unpleasant little episode, ignored Jack. Jack spoke again. I could guess how bravely he was keeping a proud front. I know word for word what he said. Mr. Dare, Your Grace, gentlemen, my apologies for being the cause of so unpleasant an incident. Pray give me leave. They paid no heed. I heard him walk to the door, heard him open it. I could not look at him. He paused, and said just one word, Dick, quite softly. Heaven knows how I got to him. I know I overturned my chair. That drew Dare's attention. He said, You are not going, Dick. I shouted yes, at him, and then Jack took my arm, leading me out. And all he said was, Poor old Dick. He had no word of blame for me. He would not allow me to go back and tell the truth, as I would have done. Warburton, when Jack called me to him, I could have cried it aloud, but he would not have it. He said, For Lavinia's sake. Warburton blew his nose violently. His fingers were trembling. You know what happened afterwards. You know how my father turned Jack out penniless, you know how his friends shunned him, you know my poor mother's grief. And you know that he went away, that we could not find him when my mother died. His last words to me were, Make Lavinia happy, and try to forget all this. Forget it. Heavens! Try as I might, I could hear nothing further of him until 2 months ago, when he waylaid me. Then I was half dazed at the suddenness of it. He grasped my hand and laughed. It was so dark, I could scarce see him. I only had time to demand his address, and then he was off, galloping away over the heath. I think even then he bore no malice.
He does not now, said Warburton sharply. But, Master Dick, if all this is true, why do you not even now clear him? Surely. Richard turned his head slowly. Now I may not drag my wife's name through the mud. By clearing him I ruin her. Warburton could find nothing to say. Only after some time did he clear his throat and say that he was honored by Carstares' confidence. You dwell on the part played by His Grace on that evening. Surely your, shall we say, overwrought imagination magnified that. Richard was disinterested. I suppose so. Mayhap 'twas his extraordinary personality dominating me. He cannot have pulled the wires as I thought he did. Not even Belmanoir could make me act as I did. But at the time I felt that he was pushing, compelling me to accuse Jack. Oh, doubtless I was mad. Warburton eyed the dejected figure compassionately. Then he seemed to harden himself and to regain some of his lost primness of manner. You are determined not to accept the revenues, sir? I have not yet sunk so low, Mr. Warburton. His lordship leaves Wyncham and all appertaining to it at your disposal. He would be grieved at your refusal. I will not touch it. The lawyer nodded. I confess, Mr. Carstares, I am relieved to hear you say that. It will not be necessary again to communicate with his lordship. I think he does not desire any intercourse with his family. He finds it too painful. But he wished to be remembered to you, sir. Also to her ladyship. Thank you. You could ascertain nothing of his situation? He did not confide in you? He was very reticent, sir. I think he is not unhappy. And not embittered? Certainly not that, sir. Mr. Warburton rose, plainly anxious to be gone. Reluctantly Richard followed his example. You have nothing further to tell me of him? I regret, sir, nothing. Richard went slowly to the door, and opened it. You must allow me to thank you, sir, for your goodness in undertaking what I know must have been a painful task. I am very grateful. Mr. Warburton bowed low. I beg you will not mention it, sir. Nothing I might do for the Carstares could be aught but a pleasure. Again he bowed, and the next instant was gone. 4. Introducing the Lady Lavinia Carstares. Richard went slowly back to his chair. After a moment he sat down, staring blankly out of the window, his hands loosely clasped on the desk before him. So he remained for a long while, immobile. At last, with the faintest of sighs, he moved and picked up a quill. He dipped it in the ink, and, with his other hand, drew towards him a sheaf of papers. Presently he was writing steadily. For perhaps 20 minutes the quill travelled to and fro across the pages, then it paused, and Richard looked up towards the door. It opened to admit Lady Lavinia. She came rustling into the room with her embroidery in her hand. She dropped her husband a mock curtsy and went over to a high-backed armchair, stretching out a dimpled hand to draw it forward. But even as her fingers touched it she had changed her mind, and fluttered over to the couch, there to seat herself with much swirling of brocades and arrangement of skirts. She then proceeded to occupy herself with her work, plying her needle hurriedly and jerkily. Richard watched her in silence, following each turn of the pretty hand and each movement of her fair head. The silence was evidently not to my lady's taste, for she presently began to beat an impatient tattoo on the floor with one slender foot. Still he said nothing, and she raised her pure china-blue eyes to his face. Why so glum, Dick? Why do you not talk to me? Her voice was rather high-pitched and childish, and she had a curious way of ending each sentence with an upward lilt and a long drawn-out accent, very fascinating to listen to. Richard smiled with an obvious effort. Am I, my dear? I crave your pardon. Warburton has just been. Her face clouded over instantly, and the full-lipped mouth drooped petulantly. He has seen him. Oh! She made the word twice its length, and filled it with disinterest. Yes. Jack will have none of it. He asks me to be his steward and to use Wyncham as I will. He is very generous. Yes, oh yes. And you will, Richard? He ignored the question. Warburton says he is not much changed. Oh. Again the long-drawn monosyllable, accompanied by a tiny yawn. He says he does not think Jack bears me ill will. He paused, as if expecting her to speak, but she was absorbed in arranging 2 flowers, culled from a bowl at her side, at her breast, and took no notice. Carstares turned his head away wearily. If it were not for you, my dear, I would tell the truth. I believe I shall go crazed, and I do not. Dick. She dropped the flowers on the floor and thought no more about them. Dick. Oh, you need have no fear. I do not suppose, bitterly, that I have the courage to face them all now after 6 years. Lavinia moved restlessly, brushing her hand along the couch. You will not do it, Richard? Promise. You will not. I could not bear the disgrace of it. Promise me you will never do it. No, he said slowly, not looking at her. No, I cannot promise that. She sprang to her feet, flinging her broidery from her carelessly, and waved fierce, agitated little hands. That means you will do it. You want to disgrace me. You do not care how you hurt me by holding this threat over my head so cruelly. You. Lavinia, for heaven's sake, he implored, pushing back his chair. Calm yourself. He knew she was about to fly into one of her sudden passions, and frowned with acute vexation. I will not. Oh yes, yes. You think me a shrew. I know. But you need not frown on me, sir, for you are worse. No, I will not. Hush. I am a horrid woman, yes, but you are a cheat. Carstares strode over to her. Lavinia. No. Leave me alone. You make me miserable. You refuse me everything that I want most, and then you threaten to disgrace me. That is untrue, cried Richard, goaded into replying. I will not promise, that is all. What have I refused you that was within my means to give you? God knows you try your best to ruin me. There. 'Tis I who am to blame. Pray, did you not induce my lord to leave his money to John when you knew he would have willed it all to you and you had kept silence? You took no thought to me. For heaven's sake, Lavinia, be still. You do not know what you are saying. She pressed her hands to her hot cheeks. No, I am unreasonable. I know it, but don't tell me so, for I cannot bear it. And don't look reproach at me, Richard. You drive me mad, I tell you. She was sweeping up and down the room like some caged animal, lashing herself to a worse fury. Say something, Richard. Do something. Don't stand there so quietly. Oh, you should never have married me. I displease you, and you make me worse. And you do not see how 'tis that I cannot live without pleasure, and money. I am despicable. Yes, but what are you? Oh, why did you tell me you cheated after you had wedded me? Angry sobs escaped her, her handkerchief was in shreds upon the floor. Carstares turned his back to her, that she might not see how she had contrived to hurt him, and the movement drove her to fresh fury. Don't do that. Don't. You make me worse by your dreadful silence. Oh, if you really loved me. You cannot doubt that, he cried out, wheeling suddenly round. You know how I love you, don't you? He gripped her by the shoulders and swung her to face him. She trembled and gave a sobbing little laugh. As suddenly as it had come, her anger left her. Oh, yes, you do love me, Dickie. She twined her arms about his neck and shrank closer. God help me, yes, he groaned, thrusting her away. And you care for no one save yourself. No, she cried, pressing up to him again. Do not say that, Dick. Indeed, I love you, but I cannot live without gaiety, you know I cannot. Oh, I do not doubt but what I am very selfish, but 'tis the way I am fashioned, and I cannot change my nature. And now I have hurt you, and I did not mean to. My dear, I know you did not, but try to be less a child, I beg of you. You are so uncontrolled, so. I knew you would say that, she answered in a dead voice. You do not understand me. You expect me to be good, and patient, and forbearing, and I tell you 'tis not in my nature. But, Lavinia, you can control your passions, he said gently. No. I cannot. We Belmanors, as God made us, so we are, and he made us spendthrift, and pleasure-loving, and mad. She walked slowly to the door. But you do not understand, and you try to make me staid, and thoughtful, and a good mother, when I am dying for life, and excitement, and care not that for husbandry. She opened the door slowly. And now my head aches, and you look grave and say 'tis my wicked temper, when I want you to be sorry, and to be ready to do anything to comfort me. Why can you not take me to London, when you know how I long to be there, instead of in this gloomy house with naught to do, save mind my child and my needle? I am so tired of it all. So very tired of it all. She would have left the room then, but he detained her. Wait, Lavinia. You say you are unhappy. She released the door handle and fluttered her hands expressively. Unhappy? No, I am dull. I am ill-tempered. I am discontented. I am aught you please, so do not be sad, Richard. I cannot bear you to be solemn. Oh, why do we quarrel? With one of her impulsive movements she was again at his side, with her beautiful face upturned. Love me, Richard. Take me to London and never mind and I do squander your money. Say you do not care. Say that nothing matters so long as I am happy. Why do you not say it? Does anything matter? Don't be prudent, Dickie, be wild, be reckless, be anything rather than grave and old. Her arms crept up to his coaxingly. Take me to London.
Carstares smoothed the soft hair back from her forehead, very tenderly, but his eyes were worried. My dear, I will take you, but not just yet. There is so much to be done here. If you will wait a little longer. If I will wait. If I will be patient and good. But I cannot. Oh, you don't understand, Dickie, you don't understand. I am sorry, dear. I promise I will take you as soon as possible, and we will stay as long as you please. Her arms fell away. I want to go now. Dear. Very well, very well. We will go presently. Only don't reason with me. He looked at her concernedly. You are overwrought, my love, and tired. Yes, she agreed listlessly. Oh yes, I will go now and rest. Forgive me, Dick. She kissed her fingertips and extended them to him. I will be good one day. She turned and hurried out of the room and up the stairs, leaving the door open behind her. Richard stayed for a moment looking round at the signs of her late presence. Mechanically he stooped to pick up her embroidery and the pieces of her handkerchief. The 2 flowers were broken off short, and he threw them away. Then he left the room and went out onto the sunny terrace, gazing across the beautiful gardens into the blue distance. Across the lawn came a child of 4 or 5, waving a grimy hand. Father. Richard looked down at him and smiled. Well, John? The boy climbed up the terrace steps, calling his news all the way. 'Tis Uncle Andrew, sir. He has rid over to see you, and is coming through the garden to find you. Is he? Has he left his horse at the stables? Sir. So I came to tell you. Quite right. Will you come with me to meet him? The little rosy face lighted up with pleasure. Oh, may I? He cried and slipped his hand in Richard's. Together they descended the steps and made their way across the lawn. I have run away from Betty, announced John with some pride. There's Uncle Andrew, sir. He bounded away towards the approaching figure. Lord Andrew Belmanoir was Richard's brother-in-law, brother to the present Duke. He came up with John in his arms and tumbled him to the ground. Good day, Dick. 'Tis a spoilt child you have here. He is but now escaped from his nurse, Splendid. Come, John, you shall walk with us, and we'll confound fat Betty. He slipped his arm through Richard's as he spoke. Come, Dick. There's a deal I have to say to you. He grimaced ruefully. The child ran on ahead towards the woods, a great bull-mastiff at his heels. What's to do now? Asked Richard, looking round into the mobile, dissipated countenance. The devil's in it this time, and no mistake, answered his lordship with a rueful shake of his head. Debts? Lord, yes. I was at Delaby's last night, and the stakes were high. Altogether I've lost about 3,000, counting what I owe Carew. And devil take me and I know where 'tis to come from. Here's Tracy turned saint and swears he'll see me damned before he hands me another penny. I doubt he means it, too. Tracy was the Duke. Richard smiled a little cynically. He had already had to lend his Grace 1,000 guineas to pay off some trifling debt. He means it right enough. I believe it would puzzle him to find it. Do you say so? Why, 'tis impossible, man. Tracy was in town scarce a fortnight since, and he had a run of the devil's own luck. I tell you, Dick, I saw him walk off with a cool 5,000 one night. And then he denies me a paltry 3. Lord, what a brother! And all with the air of an angel, as if he had never lost at dice. And a homily thrown in. Anyone would think I had cheated, instead of ahem. Dick, I'm confoundedly sorry. Damn thoughtless of me, never thought about Joe about what I was saying, I'm a fool. For Richard had winced.
You cannot help that, he said, forcing a laugh. Have done with your apologies, and continue. They had come to the stream by now, and crossed the little bridge into the wood. Oh, there's not much more. 'Tis only that something must be done, for Carew won't wait, and stab me if I'd ask him, the lean-faced scarecrow, so I came to you, Dick. He let go Richard's arm and flung himself down on a fallen tree trunk, regardless of velvet and laces. You're a good fellow, and you don't lecture a man as Tracy does, devil take him, and you play high yourself, or you did, though 'tis an age since I saw you win or lose enough to wink at. And, after all, your lavish husband, and oh, damn it all, Dick, 'tis monstrous hard to ask you. Carstares, leaning against a tree, surveyed the youthful rake amusedly. Tush, Andrew, he reassured him. You're welcome to ask, but the Lord knows where I'm to find it. Gad, what a life. Here's Lavinia keeps buying silks, and I don't know what all, and she was ever a spendthrift jade, said Andrew with a mighty frown. Richard laughed at him. You're a thrifty fellow yourself, of course. Andrew looked round for something to throw at him, and finding nothing, relapsed once more into deepest despondency. You're in the right of tea. We're a worthless lot. Tea's the old man's blood in us, I doubt not, with a smattering of her grace. You never knew my mother, Richard. She was French, lavish the spit of her. There's Tracy, stap me, but Tracy's the very devil. Have you ever seen a face like his? No, I'll swear you've not. What with his sneering mouth and his green eyes, oh, 'tis enough to make a fellow go to the dogs to have a brother like it, 'pon my soul it is. You laugh, but I tell you 'tis serious. Go on. Well, next there's Bob, damn it all, but I'm sorry for Bob. 'Tis a beggarly pittance they give one in the army, and he was never one to pinch and scrape. Well, as I say, there's Bob, and I never see him, but what it's, lend me 100, Andy, or the like. And all to buy his mistress some gewgaw. That's what sickens me. Why, Bob's forever in some scrape with a petticoat, and as for Tracy, gad, how they can. Then there's Lavinia, but I should think you know her by now, and lastly, there's your humble servant. And I tell you, Dick, what with the racing, and the cards, and the bottle, I shall be a ruined man before you can turn round. And the pother is I'll never be any different. 'Tis in the blood, so where's the use in trying? He made a rueful grimace, and rose. Come on, young Rip. We're going back.
John, engaged in the task of hunting for tadpoles in the water some yards distant, nodded and ran on. "I fear my lady is indisposed," said Richard hesitatingly. "You wish to see her?" Andrew winked knowingly. "Tantrums, eh? Oh, I know her. No, I do not care and I do not see her. 'Tis little enough she cares for me, though she's as thick as thieves with Tracy. Oh, I'll be dumb." They walked slowly back to the house, Andrew, silent for once, twirling his gold-mounted cane. "You shall have the money, of course." "When do you want it?" said Richard presently. "'Pon honour, you're a devilish good fellow, Dick. But if 'tis like to put you to any nonsense. When do you need it?" "I should pay Carew as soon as maybe. Markham can wait over if—" "No. Wednesday. 'Twill do excellently well. Dick, you're a—" "Oh, sure. 'Tis naught. I want your opinion on the bay mare I bought last week. You'll maybe think her a trifle long in the leg, but she's a fine animal." John had run indoors, and the two men proceeded to the stables alone, Andrew discoursing all the way, recounting for his brother-in-law's benefit the choicest morsels of scandal that were circulating town at the moment. That his auditor but attended with half an ear affected him not at all. He never paused for an answer, and, in any case, was far too good-natured to care if he received none. By the time they had duly inspected the mare and walked back to the house, it was nearly 4 o'clock, and, not altogether to Carstares' surprise, Lavinia was awaiting them on the terrace, clad in a totally different gown, and with her hair freshly arranged and curled. "'Twould appear that Lavinia has recovered," remarked Andrew as they mounted the steps. "She was ever thus, not 2 minutes the same." "Well, Lavy." "Well, Andrew." She gave him a careless hand to kiss, but smiled sweetly up at her husband. "My headache is so much better," she told him, "and they said that Andrew was come to see you. So I came downstairs." She turned eagerly to her brother. "Tell me, Andrew, is Tracy at home?" "Lord, yes. He arrived yesterday, devil take him. Do you want him?" "Oh, yes," she nodded. "I want to see him again. I've not set eyes on him for an age. I want you to take me back with you." "Surely, my dear, 'tis a trifle late in the day for such a drive," demurred Richard, trying to conceal his annoyance. "Can you not wait until tomorrow?" "Faith, you'll have to, Lavy, for I'll not take you today, that's certain. I'm riding to Fletcher's when I leave here. Tracy can visit you tomorrow and he chooses." "Will he?" she asked doubtfully. Andrew clapped his hand to his vest pocket. "If I had not forgot," he exclaimed. "I've a letter from him for you. He intends waiting on you tomorrow, in any case. Lord, what it is to have a scatterbrain like mine!" He pulled a handful of papers from his pocket and selected one, sealed, and addressed in a sloping Italian handwriting. Lavinia pounced upon it joyfully, and tore it open. Andrew restored the rest of the documents to his pocket with yet another rueful laugh. "Duns, Richard. Duns." "Give them to me," answered the other, holding out his hand. "Oh, no. But many thanks, Dick. These are quite unimportant." "Why not pay them all, and start afresh?" urged Carstares. "Lord, no. Why, I should be so damned elated that before the day was out there'd be a score of fresh debts staring me in the face. Let me lend you 1,000 to begin on. Could you not keep out of debt?" "I keep out of debt? Impossible. Don't look so solemn, Dick, I told you 'twas in the blood. We never have a penny to bless ourselves with, but what's the odds? I shall have a run of luck soon. A man can't always lose. Then I shall be able to repay you, but, of course, I shan't. It'll all go at the next table." "I know." He spoke so ingenuously that Richard could not be angry with him. There was a certain frankness about him that pleased, and though he might be spendthrift and heedless, and colossally selfish, Richard felt a genuine affection for him. He would have liked to argue the point further, but Lavinia came forward, refolding her letter. "Tracy is coming tomorrow afternoon," she told her husband. "'Twill be prodigiously agreeable, will it not?" He assented, but with a lack of warmth that did not fail to strike her ears. "And he will stay to dine with us," she cried challengingly. "Certainly, my love. Look pleased, Dickie, look pleased. Why don't you like Tracy? He is my own brother, you must like him." "Of course I like him, Lavinia. Pray, do not be foolish." "Oh, I am not. Don't be cross, Dickie dear." "Well, if you like him, I'm surprised," broke in Andrew. "I can't bear him." Flash your eyes at me, Lavy, I don't mind." Lavinia opened her mouth to retaliate, but Richard hastily interposed. Their bickering was more than he could bear, and he never understood how Lavinia could stoop to quarrel with the boisterous youth, who tried so palpably to rouse her. He bore them both off to the house, feeling much like a nursemaid with two recalcitrant children. His Grace of Andover. Lady Lavinia dressed herself with even more than her usual care next afternoon, and well-nigh drove her maid distracted by her flashes of temper and impatient, contradictory orders. So lengthy was the toilet that she was only just in her boudoir when His Grace of Andover was announced. She had no time to tell the footman that she would receive His Grace, for almost before the words were out of James' mouth, he stood bowing in the doorway, sure of his welcome. He was curiously like his sister, this man, and at the same time curiously unlike. Hers were the high cheekbones and pinched, aristocratic nostrils, but the mouth with its thin lips, and the heavy-lidded green eyes, were totally different. His Grace's brows slanted up at the corners, and his eyes, though piercing and bright, were constantly veiled by the black-lashed lids. He wore his own black hair, unpowdered, and that, together with the black and silver garments that he always affected, greatly enhanced the natural pallor of his countenance. Altogether it was a very striking figure that stood just before the closed white door and bowed to my lady.
Lavinia took an eager step towards him, swinging her pearl-grey brocades. "Oh, Tracy," she cooed, holding out both hands. His Grace advanced into the room and bent low over them. "I rejoice to find you within, Lavinia," he said, a faint tinge of sarcasm running through his smooth tones. "As you perceive, I rode over." He made a gesture towards his high boots with their wicked-looking spurs. "No doubt Andrew forgot to give you my letter." "No," she said, slipping her hand in his arm. "He remembered in time, and oh, Tracy, I was so vastly delighted to have it." "I am indeed honored," he replied. "I am come on a sufficiently important matter." "Oh." She pulled her hand away disappointedly. "Money." "You are really wonderful, my dear. As you so crudely remark, money. Will you not be seated?" She sank down on the couch dejectedly and watched him take a chair opposite her. "Your most noble lord and master lent me a trifling sum the other day, but very trifling. I am, as usual, hard-pressed. And that young fool Andrew must needs fall into debt." My lady opened wide her eyes in surprise. "Do you tell me you need money from Richard to pay Andrew's debts?" she asked, frankly incredulous. "I do not. Is it likely?" The remark was purely by the way. "Well, in any case, Andrew borrowed 3,000 from poor Dick only yesterday. I know, because I heard him speak of it." His Grace raised his black brows in patient exasperation. How unnecessary of Andrew. And how typical. So poor Dick has been squeezed already? "Don't speak like that, Tracy," she cried. "Dickie is good to me." She met his piercing look unflinchingly. "Now this becomes interesting," drawled the Duke. "Since when have you come to that conclusion? And why this sudden loyalty?" "I have always been loyal to him, Tracy." You know I have. I worry him, and indeed he is very forbearing. But how charming of him. No, do not sneer, Tracy. He has promised to take me to London for the whole winter. His Grace leant back in his chair again. Now I understand, he said placidly. I was at a loss before. 'Tis not that, Tracy. Indeed I realize how kind he is to me. And we have quarrelled again. We are always quarrelling, and I know 'tis all my fault. What a comfortable conviction, my dear. No, 'tis not comfortable, Tracy, for somehow I cannot change my disposition, though I mean to be patient and sweet. Tracy, I hate Wyncham. You hate Wyncham? There was a time. I know, but I never meant to live here always like this. I want to go to London. I thought you said you were going? Yes, I am, but I want to go with someone who is gay, not. In fact, you want distraction, and not with the amiable Richard. Well, I can conceive that life with him might prove uninspiring. Safe, my dear, but not exciting. I knew you would understand. You see, he does not like me to play at cards, because I cannot stop, and he cannot see how 'tis that I care naught for what he calls home life when there are routs, and the play, and real life. He is so staid, Tracy, and careful. A good trait in a husband, Lavinia, replied his Grace cynically. 'Tis because I do not possess it that I am single now. Her lips curled scornfully at this, for well she knew her brother. No, Tracy, that is not so. It is because you are a devil. No woman would marry you. That is most interesting, my dear, purred his Grace. But pray strive to be a little more original. Continue your analysis of Richard's sterling character. 'Tis only that we are so different, she sighed. I always desire to do things quickly. If I think of something, I want it at once. You know, Tracy, and he likes to wait and think on it, and oh, 'tis so tiresome, and it puts me in a bad humor, and I behave like a hysterical bourgeoise. She got up swiftly, clasping her nervous little hands. When he speaks to me in that gentle, reasoning way, I could scream. Tracy, do you think I am mad? She laughed unmusically. No, he replied, but the next thing to it, a Belmanoir. Perhaps it was a pity you ever married Richard. But there is always the money. There is not, she cried out sharply. Not? What mean you? Tracy, 'tis of this that I wanted to speak. You think my lord left his money to Dick? Certainly. He should be stupendously wealthy. He is not. But, my good girl, the revenue must be enormous. He has the land, surely? No. He has not the land. Oh, but I am angry whenever I think on it. He induced my lord to leave it to John. He has but his younger son's portion. I still fail to understand. You informed me that the Earl left all to Richard. He changed his will, Tracy. He changed his will. Then, my dear, must you have played your cards very badly? 'Twas not my fault, Tracy, indeed 'twas not. I knew naught until the will was read. Richard never spoke a word to me about it. And now we are comparatively poor. Her voice trembled with indignation, but his Grace only whistled beneath his breath. I always knew, of course, that Dick was a fool, but I never guessed how much so till now. At that she flared up. He is not a fool. He is an honest man, and 'tis we, I tell you, who are mean and despicable and mercenary. Undoubtedly, Lavinia, but pray do not excite yourself over it. I suppose he is still devoted to that young hothead? Yes, 'tis all Jack, until I am sick to death of the sound of his name, and she broke off, biting her lip. And what? Oh, naught. But 'tis all so disagreeable, Tracy. It certainly is slightly disturbing. You had better have chosen John, in spite of all, it seems. She stamped angrily. Oh, where's the good in being flippant? My dear Lavinia, where's the good in being anything else? The situation strikes me as rather amusing. To think of the worthy Richard so neatly overturning all my plans. If it had not been for you, I might never have married him. Why did you throw them both in my way? Why did I ever set eyes on either? It should have been a good match, my dear, and, if I remember rightly, no one was more alive to that fact than yourself. She pouted angrily and turned her shoulder to him. Still, he continued reflectively, I admit that for the smart lot we are, we do seem rather to have bungled the affair. Lavinia swept round upon him. Oh, do you care no more than that? How can you be so casual? Does it affect you not at all? He wrinkled his thin nose expressively. I shall not weep over it, Lavinia, but 'tis a plaguey nuisance. But we must see what can be done. And that brings me back to the original subject. Despite these upsetting revelations, I still require that money. Oh, dear. How much must you have, Tracy? 500 might suffice. Tracy, do not the estates bring in anything? She asked petulantly. And Andrew told us you had a run of marvelous luck not a fortnight since. Since then, my dear, I have had 3 runs of marvelous ill luck. As to the estates, they are mortgaged up to the hilt, as you very well know. What little there is between 3. And Robert is extravagant. I hate Robert. I am not partial to him myself, but it makes no odds. I wish he might die. Oh no, no. Now I am become ill-natured again. I don't wish it, only I am so tired of everything. You shall have that money as soon as possible, but be careful, Tracy, please be careful. 'Tis not easy to get money from Dick. No, I should imagine not. However, we have managed rather well up to the present, take it all in all. Up to the present he has had all the money he wanted. My lord denied him naught. Well, 'tis unfortunate, as I said before, but it must be endured. Where is Dick? I know not. You will stay to dinner, Tracy? Thank you. I shall be charmed. Yes, yes, oh, how prodigiously pleasant it is to see you again. Soon I shall come to Andover. Will you let me stay a few days? The question is, will Richard allow you to stay so long in my contaminating presence? Richard would never keep me away, Tracy, she replied proudly. He could not. Oh, why is it that I don't love him more? Why do I not care for him as much as I care for you even? My dear Lavinia, like all Belmanors, you care first for yourself and secondly for the man who masters you. That, alas, Richard has not yet succeeded in doing. But I do love Richard. I do, yet. Exactly. Yet. The grand passion has not yet touched you, my dear, and you are quite self-absorbed. Self-absorbed. Those are hard words. But not too hard for the case. You think solely of yourself, your own pleasure, your own character, your own feelings. If you could cast yourself into the background a little, you would be less excitable and considerably less discontented. How dare you, Tracy? Pray, what of you? Are you so selfless? Not at all. I am precisely the same. I was merely suggesting that you might be happier and you could depose self. You had best do the same yourself. My dear Lavinia, when I feel the need of greater happiness, I most undoubtedly shall. At present I am quite content. You are unkind, she protested. And you sneer at me. Pray, accept my heartfelt apologies. You shall come to Andover if the worthy Richard permits. Her face cleared as by magic. Oh, Tracy, oh, I am so desirous to be gay once more. I cannot even receive now, on account of this morning, but when I am at Andover, oh, we will not worry over anything, and I can be bad-tempered without feeling that someone is being hurt by me. Oh, come to Dickie at once, at once. He rose leisurely. I can imagine that you try Richard's patience somewhat, he remarked. Happily, your impetuosity in no way disturbs me. We will go in search of Richard. Halfway down the great staircase she perceived her husband, and flew to meet him. Richard, I was coming in search of you. Tracy has invited me to Andover for a week. He purposes to ask several people to stay, and there will be parties and entertainment. You will let me go? Say yes, Dickie, say yes, quickly. Carstares bowed to his grace, who stood watching them from the stairs. The bow was returned with exaggerated flourish. Carstares looked down at his wife. So soon, Lavinia, he remonstrated, and indicated her mourning. She shook his hand off impatiently. Oh, Dickie, does it matter? What can it signify? I do not ask you to come. No, he said half sadly, half amusedly. I notice that, my dear. No, no. I did not mean to be unkind. You must not think that. You don't think it, do you, Dick? Oh, no, he sighed. Good Dickie. She patted his cheek coaxingly. Then you will allow me to go. But yes, you must listen. You know how dull I am, and how silly, tease because I need a change, and I want to go to Andover. I want to go. Yes, dear, I know. But my father is not yet dead 6 weeks, and I cannot think it seemly. Please, Dick, please do not say no. 'Twill make me so unhappy. Oh, you will not be so unkind? You will not forbid me to go? I ask you not to, Lavinia. If you need a change, I will take you quietly to Bath, or where you will. Do not pain me by going to Andover just now. Bath. What do I want with Bath at this time of the year? Oh, 'tis kind in you to offer, but I want to go to Andover. I want to see all the old friends again. And I want to get away from everything here. 'Tis all so gloomy after my lord's death. Dearest, of course you shall go away, but if only you would remember that you are in mourning. But 'tis what I wish to forget. Oh, Dickie, don't be unkind. Very well, dear. If you must go, go. She clapped her hands joyfully. Oh, thank you, Dickie. And you are not angry with me? No, dear, of course not. Now I am happy. 'Tis sweet of you, Dickie, but confess you are secretly thankful to be rid of me for a week. Now are you not? She spread out her fan in the highest good humor and coquetted behind it. Richard was induced to smile. I fear I shall miss you too sadly, dear. Oh. She dropped the fan. But think how you will look forward to seeing me again, and I you. Why, I shall be so thankful to be back after a week away, that I shall be good for month. His face lightened, and he caught her hands in his. Darling, if I thought you would miss me. But of course I shall miss you, Dick. Oh, pray, mind my frock. Shall I not miss him, Tracy? Richard suddenly remembered his brother-in-law's presence. He turned and went to the foot of the stairs. So you are determined to wrest my wife from me, he smiled. Tracy descended leisurely, opening his snuff-box. Yes, I require a hostess, he said. And I have, he paused, induced her to honor Andover with her presence. Shall we have the felicity of seeing you at any time? I thank you, no. I am not, you will understand, in the mood for the gaiety for which my poor Lavinia craves. The Duke bowed slightly, and they all three went out onto the terrace, Lavinia laughing and talking as Richard had not heard her laugh or talk for days. She was the life and soul of the little dinner party, flirting prettily with her husband and exerting herself to please him in every way. She had won her point, therefore she was in excellent spirits with all the world, and not even the spilling of some wine on her new silk served to discompose her. 6. Bath, 29, Queen Square. The autumn and the winter passed smoothly, and April found the Carstares installed at Bath, whither Lady Lavinia had teased her husband into going, despite his desire to return to Wyncham and John. She herself did not care to be with the child, and was perfectly content that Richard should journey occasionally to Wyncham to see that all was well with him. On the whole, she had enjoyed the winter, for she had induced Richard to open Wyncham House, Mayfair, the Earl's town residence, where she had been able to hold several entirely successful routs, and many select little card parties. Admirers she had many, and nothing so pleased her vain little heart as masculine adulation. Carstares never entered his home without stumbling against some fresh flame of hers, but as they mostly consisted of what he rudely termed the lapdog type, he was conscious of no jealous qualms, and patiently submitted to their inundation of his house. He was satisfied that Lavinia was happy, and, as he assured himself at times when he was most tried, nothing else signified. The only flaw to Lavinia's content was the need of money. Not that she was stinted, or ever refused anything that he could in reason give her, but her wants were never reasonable. She would demand a new town chariot, upholstered in pale blue, not because her own was worn or shabby, but because she was tired of its crimson cushions. Or she would suddenly take a fancy to some new, and usually fabulously expensive toy, and having acquired it, weary of it in a week. Without a murmur, Richard gave her lapdogs, of the real kind, black pages, jewels, and innumerable kickshaws, for which she rewarded him with her brightest smiles and tenderest caresses. But when she required him to refurnish Wyncham House in the style of the French court, throwing away all the present queen and furniture, the tapestries, and the countless old trappings that were one and all so beautiful and so valuable, he put his foot down with a firmness that surprised her. Not for any whim of hers was Jack's house to be spoiled. Neither her coaxing nor her tears had any effect upon Richard, and when she reverted to sulks, he scolded her so harshly that she was frightened, and in consequence silenced. For a week she thought and dreamt of nothing but gilded French chairs, and then abruptly, as all else, the fancy left her, and she forgot all about it. Her mantua-maker's bills were enormous, and caused Richard many a sleepless night, but she was always so charmingly penitent that he could not find it in his heart to be angry, and, after all, he reflected, he would rather have his money squandered on her adornment than on that of her brothers. She was by turns passionate and cold to him, one day enrapturing him by some pretty blandishment, the next snapping peevishly when he spoke to her. At the beginning of the season he dutifully conducted her to routs and bals masques. But soon she began to go always with either Andrew or Robert, both of whom were in town, and whose casual chaperonage she much preferred to Richard's solicitous care. Tracy was rarely in London for more than a few days at a time, and the Carstares, greatly to Richard's relief, saw but little of him. Carstares disliked Colonel Lord Robert Belmanoir, but the Duke he detested, not only for his habitual sneer towards him, but for the influence that he undoubtedly held over Lavinia. Richard was intensely jealous of this, and could sometimes hardly bring himself to be civil when his Grace visited my lady. Whether justly or not, he inwardly blamed Tracy for all Lavinia's crazy whims and periodical fits of ill temper. It did not take his astute Grace long to discover this, and with amused devilry he played upon it, encouraging Lavinia in her extravagance, and making a point of calling on her whenever he was in town. Carstares never knew when not to expect to find him there. He came and went to and from London with no warning whatsoever. No one ever knew where he was for more than a day at a time, and no one was in the least surprised if he happened to be seen in London when he should, according to all accounts, have been in Paris. They merely shrugged their shoulders, and exchanged glances, murmuring, "Devil Belmanoir," and wondering what fresh intrigue he was in. So altogether Richard was not sorry when my lady grew suddenly sick of town and was seized with a longing for Bath. He had secretly hoped that she might return to Wyncham, but when she expressed no such wish, he stifled his own longing for home, shut up the London house, and took her and all her baggage to Bath, installing her in Queen Square in one of the most elegantly furnished houses in the place. Lady Lavinia was at first charmed to be there again, delighted with the house, and transported over the excellencies of the new French milliner she had discovered. But the milliner's bills proved monstrous, and the drawing-room of her house not large enough for the routs she contemplated giving. The air was too relaxing for her, and she was subject to constant attacks of the vapours that were as distressing to her household as they were to herself. The late hours made her head ache as it never ached in London, and the damp gave her a cold. Furthermore, the advent of an attractive and exceedingly wealthy little widow caused her many a bitter hour, to the considerable detriment of her good temper. She was lying on a couch in her white and gilt drawing-room one afternoon. Alas, the craze for French furniture was a smelling bottle in hand and a bona fide ache in her head, when the door opened and Tracy walked into the room. "Good heavens," she said faintly, and uncorked her salts. It was his Grace's first appearance since she had come to Bath, and the fact that he had politely declined an invitation that she had sent to him still rankled in her mind. He bowed over the limp hand that she extended, and looked her up and down. "I regret to find you thus indisposed, my dear sister," he said smoothly. "'Tis naught. Only one of my stupid headaches. I am never well here, and this house is stuffy," she answered fretfully. "You should take the waters," he said, scrutinizing, through his eyeglass, the chair to which she had waved him. "It has an unstable appearance, my dear. I believe I prefer the couch." He moved to a smaller sofa and sat down. "Pray, how long have you been in Bath?" she demanded. "I arrived last Tuesday week." Lady Lavinia started up. "Last Tuesday week? Then you have been here 10 days and not visited me until now." He appeared to be examining the whiteness of his hands through the folds of black lace that drooped over them. "I believe I had other things to do," he said coolly. A book of sermons that she had been trying to peruse slid to the ground as Lavinia jerked a cushion into place. "And you come to me when it suits you? How could you be so unkind as to refuse my invitation?" There was a rising, querulous note in her voice which gave warning of anger. "My dear Lavinia, if you exhibit your deplorable temper to me, I shall leave you, so have a care. I thought you would understand that your good husband's society, improving though it may be, would be altogether too oppressive for my taste. In fact, I was surprised at your letter." "You might have come for my sake," she answered peevishly, sinking back again. "I suppose you have been dancing attendance on the Molesley woman? Lud! But I think you men have gone crazed." Understanding came to his Grace, and he smiled provokingly. "Is that what upsets you? I wondered." "No, 'tis not," she flashed. "And I do not see why you should think so. For my part, I cannot see that she is even tolerable, and the way the men rave about her is disgusting. Disgusting. But 'tis always the same when a woman is unattached and wealthy. Well, well, why do you not say something? Do you find her so lovely?" "To tell the truth, my dear, I have barely set eyes on the lady. I have been otherwise engaged, and I have done with all women, for the time, save one." "So I have heard you say before. Do you contemplate marriage? Lud! But I pity the girl." She gave a jeering little laugh, but it was evident that she was interested. His Grace was not in the least degree ruffled. "I do not contemplate marriage, Lavinia, so your sympathies are wasted. I have met a girl, a mere child, for sure, and I will not rest until I have her." "Lord, another farmer's chit?" "No, my dear sister, not another farmer's chit. A lady." "God help her. Who is she? Where does she live?" "She lives in Sussex. Her name I shall not tell you." Her ladyship kicked an offending cushion onto the floor, and snapped at him. "Oh, as you please. I shall not die of curiosity." "Ah." The cynical lips curled annoyingly, and Lady Lavinia was seized with a mad desire to hurl her smelling bottle at him. But she knew that it was worse than useless to be angry with Tracy, so she yawned ostentatiously, and hoped that she irritated him. If she did, she got no satisfaction from it, for he continued, quite imperturbably. "She is the daintiest piece ever a man saw, and I'll swear there's blood and fire beneath the ice." "Is it possible the girl will have none of your Grace?" wondered Lavinia in mock amazement, and had the pleasure of seeing him frown. The thin brows met over his arched nose, and the eyes glinted a little, while she caught a glimpse of cruel white teeth closing on a sensual underlip. She watched his hand clench on his snuff-box, and exulted silently at having roused him. It was a very brief joy, however, for the next moment the frown had disappeared, the hand unclenched, and he was smiling again. "At present she is cold," he admitted, "but I hope that in time she will become more plastic. I think, Lavinia, I have some experience with your charming, if capricious sex." "I don't doubt you have. Where did you meet this perverse beauty?" "In the pump room." "Lud. Pray, describe her." "I shall be delighted. She is taller than yourself, and dark. Her hair is like a dusky cloud of black, and it ripples off her brow and over her little ears in a most damnably alluring fashion. Her eyes are brown, but there are lights in them that are purest amber, and yet they are dark and velvety." My lady had recourse to the smelling bottle. "But I perceive I weary you. A man in love, my dear Lavinia." She was up again at that. "In love? You? Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. You do not know what the word means. You are like a fish, with no more of love in you than a fish, and no more heart than a fish, and—" "Spare me the rest, I beg. I am very clammy, I make no doubt, but you will at least accord me more brain than a fish." "Oh, you have brain enough," she raged. "Brain for evil. I grant you that. It is really very kind of you. The passion you feel now is not love. It is. Your pardon, my dear, but at the present moment I am singularly devoid of all strenuous emotions, so your remark is—" "Oh, Tracy, I am even quarreling with you," she cried wretchedly. "Oh, why? You are entirely mistaken, my dear. This is but the interchange of compliments. Pray, do not let me hinder you in the contribution of your share." Her lip trembled. "Go on, Tracy, go on." "Very well. I had described her eyes, I think?" "Very tediously. I will strive to be brief. Her lips are the most kissable that I have ever seen." "And, as you remarked, you have experience," she murmured. He bowed ironically. "Altogether she's as spirited a filly as you could wish for. All she needs is bringing to heel." "Does one bring a filly to heel? I rather thought—" "As usual, my dear Lavinia, you are right, one does not. One breaks in a filly. I beg leave to thank you for correcting my mixed metaphor." "Oh, pray do not mention it." "I will cease to do so. She needs breaking in. It should be amusing to tame her." "Should it?" She looked curiously at him. "Vastly. And I am persuaded it can be done. I will have her." "But what if she'll none of you?" Suddenly the heavy lids were raised. "She will have no choice." Lady Lavinia shivered and sat up. "La, Tracy, will you have no sense of decency?" she cried. "I suppose," she sneered, "you think to kidnap the girl?" "Exactly," he nodded. She gasped at the effrontery of it. "Heavens, are you mad? Kidnap a lady? This is no peasant girl, remember. Tracy, pray do not be foolish. How can you kidnap her?" "That, my dear, is a point which I have not yet decided. But I do not anticipate much trouble." "But goodness gracious me, has the child no protectors? No brothers? No father?" "There is a father," said Tracy slowly. "He was here at the beginning of their stay. He does not signify, and, which is important, he is of those that truckle. Were I to make myself known to him, I believe I might marry the girl within an hour. But I do not want that. At least, not yet." "Good God, Tracy, do you think you are living in the Dark Ages? One cannot do these things now, I tell you. Will you not at least remember that you represent our house? 'Twill be a pretty thing and there is a scandal." She broke off hopelessly and watched him flick a remnant of snuff from his cravat. "Oh, Tracy, 'tis indeed a dangerous game you play. Pray consider." "Really, Lavinia, you are most entertaining. I trust one am capable of caring for myself and mine own honor. Oh, don't sneer, she cried. Sometimes I think I quite hate you. You would be the more amusing, my dear. She swept the back of her hand across her eyes in a characteristic movement. How cross I am, she said, and laughed waveringly. You must bear with me, Tracy. Indeed, I am not well. You should take the waters, he repeated. Oh, I do. And that reminds me that I must look for your beauty. She is not like to be there, he answered. 'Tis only very seldom that she appears. What? Is she then religieuse? Religieuse? Why, in heaven's name? But not to walk in the rooms. She is staying here with her aunt, who has been ill. They do not mix much in society. How very dreadful. Yet she used to walk in the rooms, for you met her there. Yes, he admitted coolly. 'Tis for that reason that she now avoids them. Oh, Tracy, the poor child, exclaimed his sister in a sudden fit of pity. How can you persecute her, if she dislikes you? She does not. Not, then. Rather, she fears me. But she is intrigued, for all that. I persecute her, as you call it, for her own, and my, ultimate good. But they quit Bath in a few days, and then, now Sverrens. He rose. What of honest Dick? Don't call him by that odious name. I will not have it. Odious, my dear? Odious? You would have reason, and I called him dishonest Dick. Don't, she cried, covering her ears. His Grace laughed softly. Oh, Lavinia, you must get the better of these megrims of yours, for there is naught that sickens a man sooner, believe me. Oh, go away, she implored. You tease me until I cannot bear it, and indeed I do not mean to be shrewish. Please go. I am on the point of doing so, my dear. I trust you will have in a measure recovered when next I see you. Pray bear my respects to to the Honourable Richard. She stretched out her hand. Come again soon, she begged. I shall be better tomorrow. 'Tis only today that my head aches till I could shriek with the worry and the pain of it. Come again. Unfortunately, I anticipate leaving Bath within a day or two. But nothing would have given me greater pleasure than to comply with your wishes. He kissed her hand punctiliously, and took his leave. At the door he paused, and looked back mockingly. By the way, her name is Diana. He bowed again and swept out, as Lavinia buried her face in the cushions and burst into tears. It was thus that Richard found her, 20 minutes later, and his concern was so great that it in part restored her spirits, and she spent a quiet and, for him, blissful evening, playing at piquet. In the middle of a game she suddenly flung down her hand and caught at his wrist. Dickie, I will go home. Go home? What do you mean? Not. Yes, Wyncham. Why not? My dear, do you mean it? His voice quivered with joyful surprise, and the cards slipped from his hands. Yes, I mean it. But take me quickly before I change my mind. I can sleep at Wyncham, and here I lie awake all night, and my head aches. Take me home and I will try to be a better wife. Oh, Dickie, have I been tiresome and exacting? I did not mean to be. Why do you let me? She came quickly round the table and knelt at his side, giving no heed to the crumpling of her billowing silks. I have been a wicked, selfish woman, she said vehemently. But indeed I will be better. You must not let me be bad, you must not, I tell you. He flung his arm about her plump shoulders and drew her tightly to him. When I get you home at Wyncham, I promise you I will finally hector you, sweetheart, he said, laughing to conceal his deeper feelings. I shall make you into a capital housewife. And I will learn to make butter, she nodded. Then I must wear a dimity gown with a muslin apron and cap. Oh, yes, a dimity gown. She sprang up and danced to the middle of the room. Shall I not be charming, Richard? Very charming, Lavinia. Of course. Oh, we will go home at once. But first I must procure some new gowns from Marguerite. To make butter in, dear, he protested. She was not attending. A dimity gown, or shall it be of Tiffany with a quilted petticoat? Or both, she chanted. Dicky, I shall set a fashion in country toilettes. Dicky sighed. 7. Introducing sundry new characters. Not 20 minutes' walk from Lady Lavinia's house in Queen Square resided a certain Madame Thompson, a widow, who had lived in Bath for nearly 15 years. With her was staying Miss Elizabeth Bowley and her niece, Diana. Madame Thompson had been at a seminary with Miss Elizabeth when both were girls, and they had ever afterwards kept up their friendship, occasionally visiting one another, but more often contenting themselves with the writing of lengthy epistles, full of unimportant scraps of news and much gossip, amusing only on Miss Elizabeth's side, and on the widow's uninteresting and rambling. It was a great joy to Madame Thompson when she received a letter from Miss Bowley begging that she and her niece might be allowed to pay a visit to her house in Bath, and to stay at least 3 weeks. The good lady was delighted at having her standing invitation at last accepted, and straightway wrote back a glad assent. She prepared her very best bedchamber for Miss Bowley, who, she understood, was coming to Bath principally for a change of air and scene after a long and rather trying illness. In due course the two ladies arrived, the elder very small and thin, and bird-like in her movements, the younger moderately tall and graceful as a willow tree, with great candid brown eyes that looked fearlessly out onto the world, and a tragic mouth that belied a usually cheerful disposition, and hinted at a tendency to look on the gloomy side of life. Madame Thompson, whose first meeting with Diana this was, remarked on the sad mouth to Miss Elizabeth, or Betty as she was more often called, as they sat over the fire on the first night, Diana herself having retired to her room. Miss Betty shook her head darkly and prophesied that her precious Di would one day love some man as no man in her opinion deserved to be loved. And she'll have love badly, she said, clicking her knitting needles energetically. I know these temperamental children. She looks so melancholy, ventured the widow. Well, there you are wrong, replied Miss Betty. T's the sunniest-tempered child, and the sweetest-natured in the whole wide world, bless her, but I don't deny that she can be miserable. Far from it. Why, I've known her weep her pretty eyes out over a dead puppy even, but usually she is gay enough. I fear this house will be dull and stupid for her, said Madame Thompson regretfully. If only my dear son George were at home to entertain her. My love, pray do not put yourself out. I assure you Diana will not at all object to a little quiet after the life she has been leading in town this winter with her friend's family. Whatever Diana thought of the quiet, she at least made no complaint, and adapted herself to her surroundings quite contentedly. In the morning they would all walk as far as the assembly rooms, and Miss Betty would drink the waters in the old pump room, pacing sedately up and down with her friend on one side and her niece on the other. Madame Thompson had very few acquaintances in Bath, and the people she did know were all of her own age and habits, rarely venturing as far as the crowded fashionable quarter. So Diana had to be content with the society of the two old ladies, who gossiped happily enough together, but whose conversation she could not but find singularly uninteresting.
She watched the monde with concealed wistfulness, seeing Beau Nash strut about among the ladies, bowing with his extreme gallantry, always impeccably garbed, and in spite of his rapidly increasing age and bulk still absolute monarch of Bath. She saw fine painted madams in enormous hoops, and with their hair so extravagantly curled and powdered that it appeared quite grotesque, mincing along with their various cavaliers, elderly beaux with coats padded to hide their shrunken shoulders, and paint to fill the wrinkles on their faces, young rakes, stout dowagers with their demure daughters, old ladies who had come to Bath for their health's sake, titled folk of fashion, and plain gentry from the country all parading before her eyes.
One or two young bucks tried to ogle her, and received such indignant glances from those clear eyes, that they never dared annoy her again, but for the most part no one paid any heed to the unknown and plainly clad girl. Then came his Grace of Andover upon the stage. He drew Diana's attention from the first moment that he entered the pump room, a black moth amongst the gaily hued butterflies. He had swept a comprehensive glance round the scene and at once perceived Diana. Somehow, exactly how she could never afterwards remember, he had introduced himself to her aunt and won that lady's goodwill by his smoothness of manner and polished air. Madame Thompson, who, left to herself, never visited the assembly rooms, could not be expected to recognize Devil Belmanoir in the simple Mr. Everard who presented himself. As he had told his sister, Diana was cold. There was something about his grace that repelled her, even while his mesmeric personality fascinated. He was right when he said that she feared him. She was nervous, and the element of fear gave birth to curiosity. She was intrigued, and began to look forward to his daily appearance in the pump room with mingled excitement and apprehension. She liked his flattering attention, and his grand air. Often she would watch him stroll across the floor, bowing to right and left with that touch of insolence that characterized him, and rejoiced in the knowledge that he was coming straight to her, and that the painted beauties who so palpably ogled and invited him to their sides could not alter his course. She felt her power with a thrill of delight, and smiled upon Mr. Everard, giving him her hand to kiss, and graciously permitting him to sit with her beside her aunt. He would point out all the celebrities of town and Bath for her edification, recalling carefully chosen and still more carefully censured anecdotes of each one. She discovered that Mr. Everard was an entertaining and harmless enough companion, and even expanded a little, allowing him a glimpse of her whimsical nature with its laughter and its hint of tears. His Grace of Andover saw enough to guess at the unsounded depths in her soul, and he became lover-like. Diana recoiled instinctively, throwing up a barrier of reserve between them. It was not what he said that alarmed her, but it was the way in which he said it, and the vague something in the purring, faintly sinister voice that she could not quite define, that made her heart beat unpleasantly fast, and the blood rush to her temples. She began first to dread the morning promenade, and then to avoid it. One day she had a headache, the next her foot was sore, another time she wanted to work at her fancy stitchery, until her aunt, who knew how she disliked her needle, and how singularly free from headaches and all petty ailments she was wont to be, openly taxed her with no longer wishing to walk abroad. They were in the girls' bedroom at the time, Diana seated before her dressing table, brushing out her hair for the night. When her aunt put the abrupt question she hesitated, caught a long strand in her comb, and pretended to be absorbed in its disentanglement. The clouds of rippling hair half hid her face, but Miss Betty observed how her fingers trembled, and repeated her question. Then came the confession. Mr. Everard was unbearable, his attentions were odious, his continued presence revolting to Mistress Di. She was afraid of him, afraid of his dreadful green eyes and of his soft voice. She wished they had never come to Bath, and still more that they had not met him. He looked at her as if, oh, in short, he was hateful.
Miss Betty was horrified. You cannot mean it. Dear, dear, dear. Here was I thinking what a pleasant gentleman he was, and all the time he was persecuting my poor Di, the wretch. I know the type, my love, and I feel inclined to give him a good piece of my mind. Oh, no, no, implored Diana. Indeed, you must do no such thing, auntie. He has said naught that I could possibly be offended at, tease but his manner, and the way he looked at me. Indeed, you must not. Tut, child. Of course I shall say naught. But it makes me so monstrous angry to think of my poor lamb being tormented by such as he that I declare I could tear his eyes out. Yes, my dear, I could. Thank goodness we are leaving Bath next week. Yes, sighed Diana. I cannot help being glad, though Madame Thompson is very amiable. 'Tis so very different when there is no man with one. You are quite right, my love. We should have insisted on your father's staying with us instead of allowing him to fly back to his fusty, musty old volumes. I shall not be so foolish another time, I can assure you. But we need not go to the assembly rooms again. I need not go, corrected Diana gently. Of course you and Madame Thompson will continue to. To tell the truth, my love, confessed Miss Betty, I shall not be sorry for an excuse to stay away. 'Tis doubtless most ill-natured of me, but I cannot but think that Hester has altered sadly since last I saw her. She is always talking of sermons and good works. Diana twisted her luxuriant hair into a long plait, and gave a gurgling little laugh. Oh, Auntie, is it not depressing? I wondered how you could tolerate it. She is so vastly solemn, poor dear thing. Well, said Miss Betty charitably, she has seen trouble, has Hester Thompson, and I have my doubts about this George of hers. A worthless young man, I fear, from all accounts. But, unkind though it may be, I shall be glad to find myself at home again, and that's the truth. She rose and picked up her candle. In fact, I find Bath not half so amusing as I was told 'twould be. Diana walked with her to the door. 'Tis not amusing at all when one has no friends, but last year, when my cousins were with us and Papa took a house for the season on the North Parade, 'twas most enjoyable. I wish you had been there, instead of with that disagreeable Aunt Jennifer. She kissed her relative most affectionately and lighted her across the landing to her room. Then she returned to her room and shut the door, giving a tired little yawn. It was at about that moment that His Grace of Andover was ushered into the already crowded cardroom of my Lord Avon's house in Catherine Place, and was greeted with ribald cries of "Aho, Belmanoy, and where's the lady, devil?" He walked coolly forward into the full light of a great pendant chandelier, standing directly beneath it, the diamond order on his breast burning and winking like a living thing. The diamonds in his cravat and on his fingers glittered every time he moved, until he seemed to be carelessly powdered with iridescent gems. As usual, he was clad in black, but it would have been difficult to find any other dress in the room more sumptuous or more magnificent than his sable satin with its heavy silver lacing, and shimmering waistcoat. Silver lace adorned his throat and fell in deep ruffles over his hands, and in defiance of fashion, which decreed that black alone should be worn to tie the hair, he displayed long silver ribbons, very striking against his unpowdered head.
He raised his quizzing glass and looked round the room with an air of surprised hauteur. Lord Avon, leaning back in his chair at one of the tables, shook a reproving finger at him. Belmanoir, we have seen her and we protest she is too charming for you. In truth, we think we should be allowed a share in the Lady Th Millith, lisped one from behind him, and his grace turned to face dainty, effeminate little Viscount Fotheringham, who stood at his elbow, resplendent in salmon-pink satin and primrose velvet, with skirts so full and stiffly whaleboned that they stood out from his person, and heels so high that instead of walking he could only mince. Tracy made a low leg. Surely shall you have a share in her smiles and she wills it so, he purred, and a general laugh went up which caused the fop to flush to the ears, as he speedily effaced himself. He had been one of those who had tried to accost Diana, and gossip-loving Will Stapley, with him at the time, had related the story of his discomfiture to at least half a dozen men, who immediately told it to others, vastly amused at the pertinacious Viscount's rebuff. What was it Selwyn said, drawled Sir Gregory Markham, shuffling cards at Lord Avon's table. Davenant looked across at him inquiringly. George? Of Belmanoir? When? Oh, at White's one night, I forget, Jack Colmondley was there, he would know, and Horry Walpole. 'Twas of Devil and his light o' loves, quite apt, on the whole. Colmondley looked up. Did I hear my name? What was it George said of Belmanoir at White's the night Gilly made that absurd bet with Folliot? When Gilly, oh, yes, I remember. 'Twas but an old hexameter tag, playing on his name, Ist bellum bellis bellum bella puellis. He seemed to think it a fitting motto for a ducal house. There was another general laugh at this. Markham broke in on it. Who is she, Tracy? His Grace turned. Who is who? He asked languidly. Lord Avon burst out laughing. Oh, come now, Belmanoir, that won't do. It really will not. Who is she, indeed? Belmanoir, who is the black-haired beauty, and where did you find her? Cried Tom Wilding, pressing forward with a glass in one hand and a bottle of port in the other. I thought you were captivated by Cynthia Evans? Tracy looked bewildered for the moment, and then a light dawned on him. Evans? Ah, yes. The saucy widow who lived in Kensington, was it not? I remember. He had forgotten, cried Avon, and went off into another of the noisy laughs that had more than once caused Mr. Nash to shudder and to close his august eyes. You'll be the death of me, devil. Gad. But you will. Oh, I trust not. Thank you, Wilding. He accepted the glass that Tom offered, and sipped delicately. But you've not answered, reminded Fortescue from another table. He dealt the cards round expertly. Is it hands off, perhaps? Certainly, replied his Grace. It generally is, Frank, as you know. To my cost, was the laughing rejoinder, and Fortescue rubbed his sword arm as if in memory of some hurt. You pinked me finely, Tracy. Clumsily, Frank, clumsily. It might have been quicker done. The Viscount, who had been a second at the meeting, tittered amiably. Neatest thing I ever thaw, 'pon my honour. All over in less than a minute, Avon, give you my word. Never knew you had fought devil, Frank. What possessed you? I was more mad than usual, I suppose, replied Fortescue in his low, rather dreamy voice, and I interfered between Tracy and his French singer. He objected most politely, and we fought it out in Hyde Park. Gad, yes, exclaimed his partner, Lord Falmouth. Why, I was devil's second. But it was ages ago. 2 years, nodded Fortescue, but I have not forgotten, you see. Lord, I had. And 'twas the funniest fight I ever saw, with you as furious as could be and devil cool as a cucumber. You were never much of a swordsman, Frank, but that morning you thrust so wildly that stabbed me if I didn't think devil would run you through. 'Stead of that he pinks you neatly through the sword arm, and damn if you didn't burst out laughing fit to split. And then we all walked off to breakfast with you, Frank, as jolly as sandboys. Heavens, yes. That was a fight. It was amusing, admitted Tracy at Fortescue's elbow. Don't play, Frank. Fortescue flung his cards face downwards on the table. Curse you, Tracy, you've brought bad luck, he said entirely without rancour. I had quite tolerable hands before you came. Belmanoir, I will thake my chestnut mare gainst your new grey, lisped the Viscount, coming up to the table, dicebox in hand. Stap me, but that is too bad, cried Wilding. Don't take him, devil. Have you seen the brute? The 4 players had finished their card playing and were quite ready for the dice. Trust in your luck, Belmanoir, and take him, advised Pritchard, who loved hazarding other men's possessions, but kept a tight hold on his own. Take him, echoed Falmouth. Don't, said Fortescue. Of course I shall take him, answered his Grace tranquilly. My grey against your chestnut and the best of 3. Will you throw? The Viscount rattled his box with a flourish. 2 3s and a 1 turned up. With a hand on Fortescue's shoulder, and 1 foot on the rung of his chair, Tracy leaned forward and cast his own dice onto the table. He had beaten the Viscount's throw by 5. The next toss Fotheringham won, but the last fell to his Grace. Damnathian, said the Viscount cheerfully. Will you thake your grey against my terror? Thunder and turf, Fotheringham, you'll lose him, cried Nettlefold warningly. Don't stake the terror. Nonsense. Do you take me, Belmanoir? Certainly, said the Duke, and threw. Oh, and you are in a gaming mood. I will play you for the right to try my hand with the dark beauty, called Markham across the room. Against what? Asked Fortescue. Oh, what he wills. The Viscount had cast and lost, and his Grace won the second throw. "It appears my luck is in," he remarked. "I will stake my beauty against your estates, Markham." Sir Gregory shook his head, laughing. "No, no. Keep the lady." "I intend to, my dear fellow. She is not your style. I begin to wonder whether she altogether suits my palate." He drew out his snuff-box and offered it to his host, and the other men, finding that he was proof against their railing, allowed the subject to drop. In the course of the evening his Grace won 3,000 guineas, 2 at ombre and 1 at dice, lost his coveted grey hunter and won him back again from Wilding, to whom he had fallen. He came away at 3 o'clock in company with Fortescue, both perfectly cool-headed, although his Grace, for his part, had imbibed a considerable quantity of Burgundy, and more punch than any ordinary man could take without afterwards feeling very much the worse for wear. As my Lord Avon's door closed behind them, Tracy turned to his friend. "Shall we walk, Frank?" "Since our ways lie together, yes," replied Fortescue, linking his arm in the Duke's. "Down Brock Street and across the Circus is our quickest way." They strolled down the road for a few moments in silence, passing a linkman on the way. Fortescue bade him a cheery good night, which was answered in a very beery voice, but the Duke said nothing. Frank looked into his dark-browed face thoughtfully. "You've had the luck, tonight, Tracy." "Moderately. I hoped entirely to repair last week's losses." "You are in debt, I suppose?" "I believe so." "To what extent, Tracy?" "My dear fellow, I neither have, nor wish to have, the vaguest notion. Pray do not treat me to a sermon." "I shall not. I've said all I have to say on the subject." "Many times." "Yes, many times. And it has had no more effect upon you than if I had not spoken." "Less." "I dare say. I wish it were not so, for there's good in you somewhere, Tracy." "By what strange process of reasoning do you arrive at that?" "Well," said Fortescue laughing, "there's nearly always some good in the very worst of men. I count on that and your kindness to me. I should be interested to know when I have been kind to you, beyond the time when I was compelled to teach you to leave me and my affairs alone." "I was not referring to that occasion," was the dry answer. "I had not seen your act in that light. I meant well over the episode." "You could not damn yourself more effectually than by saying that," said his Grace calmly. "But we wander from the point. When have I done you an act of kindness?" "You know very well. When you extricated me from that cursed sponging house." "I remember now. Yes, that was good of me. I wonder why I did it." "'Tis what I want to know." "I suppose I must have had some sort of an affection for you. I would certainly never have done such a thing for anyone else." "Not even for your own brother," said Frank sharply. They had crossed the Circus and were walking down Gay Street now. "Least of all for them," came the placid response. "You are thinking of Andrew's tragic act. Most entertaining, was it not?" "You evidently found it so." "I did. I wanted to prolong the sensation, but my esteemed brother-in-law came to the young fool's rescue." "Would you have assisted him?" "In the end I fear I should have had to." "I believe there must be a kink in your brain," cried Fortescue. "I cannot else account for your extraordinary conduct." "We Belmanours are all half-mad," replied Tracy sweetly, "but I think that in my case it is merely concentrated evil." "I will not believe it. You have shown that you can behave differently. You do not try to strip me of all I possess. Why all those unfortunate youths you play with?" "You see, you possess so little," the Duke excused himself. "Neither do you sneer at me in your loathsome fashion." "Why?" "Because I have hardly ever any desire to. I like you." "Tare and ouns. You must like someone else in the world besides me." "I can think of no one. And I do not exactly worship the ground you tread on." The contemplation of my brothers appalls me. I have loved various women, and shall no doubt love many more. No, Tracy, interposed Fortescue, you have never loved a woman in your life. Tease that might save you. I do not allude to the lustful passion you indulge in, but real love. For God's sake, Belmanoir, live clean. Pray do not distress yourself, Frank. I am not worth it. I choose to think that you are. I cannot but feel that if you had been loved as a boy, your mother. Did you ever see my mother? Inquired his Grace lazily. No, but. Have you ever seen my sister? Yes. In a rage. Really, Because, if you have seen my mother. Only she was 10 times more violent. In fact, we were a pleasant party when we were all at home. I understand. Good gad. I believe you are sorry for me, cried Tracy scornfully. I am. Is it a presumption on my part? My dear Frank, when I am sorry for myself, you may be sorry too. Until then. When that day comes, I shall no longer pity you. Very deep, Frank. You think I shall be on the road to recovery? A pretty conceit. Luckily, the happy moment has not yet come, and I do not think it is like to. We appear to have arrived. They were standing outside one of the tall houses where Fortescue lodged. He turned and grasped his friend's shoulders. Tracy, give up this mad life you lead. Give up the women and the drink and the excessive gaming, for one day, believe me, you will overstep yourself and be ruined. The Duke disengaged himself. I very much object to being manhandled in the street, he complained. I suppose you still mean well. You should strive to conquer the tendency. I wonder if you know how insolent is your tone, Belmanoir? Asked Fortescue steadily. Naturally. I should not have attained such perfection in the art else. But pray accept my thanks for your good advice. You will forgive me, and I do not avail myself of it, I am sure. I prefer the crooked path. Evidently, sighed the other. If you will not try the straight and narrow way, I can only hope that you will fall very deeply and very honestly in love, and that the lady will save you from yourself. I will inform you of it when it comes to pass, promised his Grace. And now, good night. Good night. Frank returned the low bow with a curt nod. I shall see you tomorrow, that is, this morning, at the baths. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof, was the smiling rejoinder. Sleep soundly, Frank. He waved an ironic farewell and crossed the road to his own lodgings, which stood almost directly opposite. And I suppose you will sleep as soundly as if you had not a stain on your conscience and had not tried your uttermost to alienate the regard of the only friend you possess, remarked Frank bitterly to the darkness. Damn you, Tracy, for the villain you are. He walked up the steps to his own front door and turned the key in the lock. He looked over his shoulder as a door slammed across the street. Poor devil, he said. Oh, you poor devil. 8. The biter bit. With John Carstares the winter had passed quite uneventfully. He continued his highway robbery, but he made 2 bad blunders, not from the point of view of a thief, but from that of the gentleman in him. The first was when he stopped an opulent-looking chariot, which he found to contain 2 ladies, their maid and their jewels, and the second when the occupant of a large travelling coach chanced to be an old gentleman who possessed far greater courage than physical strength. On the first occasion my lord's dismay had been ludicrous, and he had hastily retired after tendering a naive apology. The old gentleman in the second episode had defied him so gallantly that he had impulsively offered him the butt end of one of his pistols. The old man was so surprised that he allowed the weapon to fall to the ground, where it exploded quite harmlessly, sending up a cloud of dust and smoke. Carstares then begged his pardon most humbly, assisted him back into his coach, and rode off before the astonished Mr. Dunbar had time to collect his wits. The robbing was not carried out in a very scientific manner, for, as has been seen, Carstares could not bring himself to terrorize women or old men, and there only remained the young and the middle-aged gentleman, one of whom Jack offered to fight for the possession of his jewels. His challenge was promptly accepted by the man, who happened to possess a strong sense of humor, and probably saw a chance of saving his belongings in the offer. He had been speedily worsted, but Carstares was so pleased with a particularly neat thrust which he had executed, that he forewent half the booty, and the pair of them divided the contents of the jewel box by the roadside, the sporting gentleman keeping his most valued belongings and giving Jack the surplus. They parted on the very best of terms, and all Carstares got out of the episode was a little sword practice and a few trinkets. When day came he was patrolling the west side of Sussex, beyond Midhurst, not because he thought it a profitable part, but because he knew and loved the country. One late afternoon towards the end of the month he rode gaily into one of the small villages that nestle amongst the downs, and made his way down the quaint main street to the Georgian, where he drew rein and dismounted. At his call an aged ostler hobbled out of a side door, chewing an inevitable straw, and after eyeing the newcomer and his steed for an appreciable length of time, evidently decided that they were worthy of his attention, for he came forward, remarking that it had been a pleasant day. Carstares agreed with him, and volunteered the information that it would be another fine day tomorrow, if the sunset were to be trusted. To this the ostler replied that he, for one, never trusted to no red sunsets, and added darkly that there warn't nothing so deceitful to his manner o' thinking. He'd known it be such a red sunset as never was, and yet be pouring with rain all next day. Should he take the mare? Carstares shook his head. No, I thank you. I remain here but a few moments. I doubt she's thirsty though, Jenny? Water, sir? For her, yes. For myself I fancy a tankard of your home-brewed ale. Stand, Jenny. He turned away and walked up the steps to the inn door. Be you going to leave her there, sir, standing all by herself? Inquired the man, surprised. Why, yes. She's docile enough. Well, seems to me a risky thing to leave a hoss and a skittish hoss at that, standing loose in the road. You won't be tying her to a post, master? Carstares leaned his arms on the balustrade and looked down at them. I will not. She'd be very hurt at such treatment, wouldn't you, lass? Jenny tossed her head playfully, as if in agreement, and the ostler scratched his head, looking from her to my lord. Most seems as if she understands what you be saying to her, sir. Of course she understands. Don't I tell you 'tis a clever little lady? If I call her now she'll come up these steps to me, and not all the ostlers in Christendom could stop her. Don't ye go for to do it, sir, urged the old man, backing. She must be uncommon fond o' ye. She'd be a deal fonder of you if you'd fetch her a drink, hinted Jack broadly. Sir, I be going this very instant, and with many an anxious glance over his shoulder at the perfectly quiet mare, he disappeared through an open doorway into the yard. When Carstares, tankard of ale in hand, emerged from the inn and sat himself down on one of the benches that stood against the wall, the mare was drinking thirstily from a bucket which the ancient one held for her. "'Tis a wonderful fine mare, sir," he remarked at length, after a careful inspection of her points. Carstares nodded pleasantly, and surveyed Jenny through half-shut eyes. "I think so every time I look at her," he said. "I should think she could get a bit of a pace on her, sir. Meb you've tried her racing?" "No, she wasn't brought up to that. But she's fast enough." Sir. No vices?" "Lord, no. Don't kick neither?" "Not with me." "Ah. They'll lose knows who'll stand it and who won't." Jack drained his tankard, and setting it down on the bench beside him, rose to his feet. "She'd not dream of kicking a friend, Jenny." The ostler watched her pick her way towards her master, coquetting with her head, and sidling round him in the most playful manner possible. A slow smile dawned on the man's face. "Ah, it be a purty sight to watch her, so it be," he said, and received a guinea from Jack, who never tired of listening to praise of his beloved Jenny. Carstares remounted, nodded farewell to the ostler and rode leisurely on down the street, soon branching off to the right into a typical Sussex lane, where he trotted between uneven hedges, sweet with blossom and with may, and placid fields rolling away on either side, upwards until they merged into the undulating hills, barely discernible in the gloom, that are the Downs. It was a wonderfully calm evening, with only a gentle west wind blowing, and the moon already shining faintly in the dark sky. There was nothing beyond the sound of the mare's hoofs to break the beautiful stillness of it all. He rode for some way without meeting a soul, and when at the end of an hour someone did chance along the road, it was only a labourer returning home to his supper after a long day in the fields. John bade him a cheery good evening and watched him pass on down the road humming. After that he met no one. He rode easily along for miles, into the fast-gathering darkness. He was frowning as he rode, thinking. Curiously enough, it was on his penniless days in France that his mind dwelt this evening. He had resolutely thrust that dark time behind him, determined to forget it, but there were still days when, try as he might, he could not prevent his thoughts flying back to it. With clenched teeth he recalled the days when he, the son of an earl, had taught fencing in Paris for a living. Suddenly he laughed harshly, and at the unusual sound the mare pricked up her ears and sidled uneasily across the road. For once no notice was taken of her, and she quickened her pace with a flighty toss of her head. He thought how he, the extravagant John, had pinched and scraped and saved rather than go under, how he had lived in one of the poorer quarters of the city, alone, without friends, nameless. Then, cynically now, he reviewed the time when he had taken to drinking, heavily and systematically, and had succeeded in pulling himself up at the very brink of the pit he saw yawning before him. Next the news of his mother's death. John passed over that quickly. Even now the thought of it had the power of rousing in him all the old misery and impotent resentment. His mind sped on to his Italian days. On his savings he had travelled to Florence, and from there he went gradually south, picking up all the latest arts and subtleties of fence on the way. The change of scene and of people did much to restore his spirits. His devil-may-care ways peeped out again. He started to gamble on the little money he had left. For once fortune proved kind, he doubled and trebled and quadrupled the contents of his purse. Then it was that he met Jim Salter, whom he engaged as his servant. This was the first friend since he had left England. Together they travelled about Europe, John gambling his way, Jim keeping a relentless hand on the exchequer. It was entirely owing to his watchfulness and care that John was not ruined, for his luck did not always hold good, and there were days when he lost with distressing steadiness. But Jim guarded the winnings jealously, and there was always something to fall back on. At last the longing for England and English people grew so acute that John made up his mind to return. But he found that things in England were very different from what they had been abroad. Here he was made to feel acutely that he was outcast. It was impossible to live in town under an assumed name, as he would like to have done, for too many people knew Jack Carstares, and would remember him. He saw that he must either live secluded, and the idea of becoming a highwayman occurred to him. A hermit's existence he knew to be totally unsuited to a man of his temperament, but the free, adventurous spirit of the road appealed to him. The finding of his mare J. The third, as he laughingly dubbed her, decided the point. He forthwith took on himself the role of quixotic highwayman, roaming his beloved south country, happier than he had been since he first left England, bit by bit regaining his youth and spirits, which last, not all the trouble he had been through had succeeded in extinguishing. Clip-clap, clip-clop. With a jerk he came back to earth and reined in his mare, the better to listen. Along the road came the unmistakable sound of horses' hoofs, and the scrunch-scrunch of swiftly revolving wheels on the sandy surface. By now the moon was right out, but owing to the fact that she was playing at hide-and-seek in and out of the clouds, it was fairly dark. Nevertheless, Jack fastened his mask over his face with quick, deft fingers, and pulled his hat well over his eyes. His ears told him that the vehicle, whatever it was coming towards him, so he drew into the side of the road, and taking a pistol from its holster, sat waiting, his eyes on the bend in the road. Nearer and nearer came the horses, until the leader swung round the corner. Carstares saw that it was an ordinary travelling chariot, and levelled his pistol. "Halt, or I fire." He had to repeat the command before it was heard, and to ride out from the shadow of the hedge. The chariot drew up and the coachman leaned over the side to see who it was bidding them to stop in so peremptory a manner. "What do ye want? Who are ye? Is there aught amiss?" he cried testily, and found himself staring at a long-nosed pistol. "Throw down your arms." "I ain't got none, blast ye." "On your honor." Jack dismounted. "Wish I had, and I'd see ye damned afore I'd throw 'em down." At this moment the door of the coach opened and a gentleman leapt lightly down onto the road. He was big and loose-limbed as far as Carstares could see, and carried himself with an easy grace. My lord presented his pistol. "Stand," he ordered gruffly. The moon peeped coyly out from behind a cloud and shed her light upon the little group as if to see what all the fuss was about. The big man's face was in the shadow, but Jack's pistol was not. Into its muzzle the gentleman gazed, one hand deep in the pocket of his heavy cloak, the other holding a small pistol. "Me very dear friend," he said in a rich brogue, "perhaps ye are not aware that that same pistol ye are pointing at me is unloaded. Don't move, I have ye covered." Jack's arm fell to his side, and the pistol he held clattered to the ground. But it was not surprise at Jim's defection that caused him that violent start. It was something far more overwhelming. For the voice that proceeded from the tall gentleman belonged to one whom, 6 years ago, he had counted, next to Richard, his greatest friend on earth. The man moved a little, and the moonlight shone full on his face, clearly outlining the large nose and good-humoured mouth, and above, the sleepy grey eyes. Miles O'Hara. For once Jack could find nothing amusing in the situation. It was too inconceivably hideous that he should meet his friend in this guise, and, further, be unable to reveal himself. A great longing to tear off his mask and to grasp Miles' hand assailed him. With an effort he choked it down and listened to what O'Hara was saying. "If ye will be so kind as to give me your word of honor you'll not be after trying to escape, I should be greatly obliged. But I tell ye first that if ye attempt to move, I shall shoot." Jack made a hopeless gesture with his hand. He felt dazed. The whole thing was ridiculous. How Miles would laugh afterwards. He went cold. There would be no afterwards. Miles would never know. He would be given over to the authorities, and Miles would never know that he had helped Jack Carstares to the scaffold. Perhaps, too, he would not mind so very much, now that he, Jack, was so disgraced. One could never tell. Even if he risked everything now, and told his true identity, Miles might turn away from him in disgust. Miles, who could never stoop to a dishonorable act. Carstares felt that he would bear anything sooner than face this man's scorn. "Never tell me 'tis a dumb man ye are, for I heard ye shout myself. Do ye give me your word of honor, or must I have ye bound?" Carstares pulled himself together and set his teeth as he faced the inevitable. Escape was impossible. Miles would shoot, he felt sure, and then his disguise would be torn away and his friend would see that Jack Carstares was nothing but a common highwayman. Whatever happened, that must not be, for the sake of the name and Richard. So he quietly held out his hands. I give my word, but ye can bind me if ye choose." It was his highwayman voice, raucous, and totally unlike his own. But O'Hara's eyes were fixed on the slender white hands held out to him. In his usual haphazard fashion, Jack had quite forgotten to grime his hands. They were shapely and white, and carefully manicured. Miles took either wrist in his large hands and turned them palm upwards in the moonlight. "Singularly white hands ye have, for one in your profession," he drawled, and tightened his hold as Jack tried to draw them away. "No, ye do not. Now be so good as to step within, me friend." Jack held back an instant. "My mare?" he asked, and O'Hara noted the anxiety in his voice. "Ye need not be after worrying about her," he said. "George." The footman sprang forward. "Yes, sir." Ye see that mare? I want ye to ride her home. Can ye do it? Yes, sir. I doubt it, murmured Jack. So did Jenny. She refused point blank to allow this stranger to mount her. Her master had left her in one spot, and there she would stand until he chose to bid her move. In vain did the groom coax and coerce. She ran round him and seemed a transformed creature. She laid her ears flat and gnashed at the bit, ready to lash out furiously at the first opportunity. Jack watched the man's futile struggles with the ghost of a smile about his lips. Jenny, he said quietly, and Ahara looked round at him sharply, frowning. Unconsciously, he had spoken naturally, and the voice was faintly familiar. Jenny twitched the bridle from the perspiring groom and minced up to the prisoner. Would ye allow me to have a hand free, sir? He asked. Meb I can manage her. Without a word Miles released him, and he caught the bridle, murmuring something unintelligible to the now quiet animal. Ahara watched the beautiful hand stroke her muzzle reassuringly, and frowned again. No ordinary highwayman this. Mount her now, will ye? Jack flung at the groom, and kept a warning hand on the rein as the man obeyed. With a final pat he turned away. She'll do now, sir. Ahara nodded. Ye trained her well. Get in, please. Jack obeyed, and in a minute or two Ahara jumped in after him, and the coach began to move forward. For a while there was silence, Carstares keeping himself well under control. It was almost unbearable to think that after this brief drive he would never set eyes on his friend again, and he wanted so badly to turn and grasp that strong hand. Miles turned in his seat and tried to see the masked face in the darkness. Ye are a gentleman? He asked, going straight to the point. Jack was prepared for this. Me, sir? Law no, sir. I do not believe ye. Don't be forgettin' I've seen your hands. Hands, sir, in innocent bewilderment. Sure, ye don't think I'd be believing ye an ordinary rogue, with hands like that. I don't rightly understand ye, sir. Bejabers then, you'll be understanding me tomorrow. Tomorrow, sir? Certainly. Ye may as well tell me now as then. I'm not such a daft fool as I look, and I know a gentleman when I see one, even an he does growl at me as you do, he chuckled. And I'd an odd feeling I knew ye when ye spoke to the mayor. I'd be loath to send a friend to the gallows. How well Jack knew that soft, persuasive voice. His hands clenched as he forced himself to answer. I don't think I've ever seen ye afore, sir. Maybe ye have not. We shall see tomorrow. What do ye mean by tomorrow, sir? Ventured Carstares uneasily. Sure, ye will have the honor of appearing before me friend. Before you, sir? Why not? I'm a justice of the peace, heaven save the mark. There was a breathless pause, and then at last the funny side of it struck Jack, and his shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. The exquisite irony of it was almost too much for him. He, the Earl of Wyncham, was to be formally questioned by his friend Sir Miles Ahara, J.P. What ails ye now, man? Ye find it amusing? Asked Miles, surprised. Oh, lud, yes, gasped Jack, and collapsed into his corner. 9. Lady Ahara intervenes. Lady Ahara found that her big, indolent husband was unusually silent next morning at breakfast. She had not been married long enough to consent to being practically ignored, no matter what the time of day, but she had been married quite long enough to know that before she took any direct action against him, she must first allow him to assuage his appetite. Accordingly she plied him with coffee and eggs, and with a satisfied and slightly motherly air, watched him attack a sirloin of beef. She was a pretty, bird-like little lady, with big eyes, and soft brown curls escaping from under a demure but very becoming mob cap. She measured 5'0" in her stockings, and was sometimes referred to by her large husband as the midget. Needless to say, this flippant appellation was in no wise encouraged by the lady. She decided that Miles had come to the end of his repast, and, planting 2 dimpled elbows on the table, she rested her small chin in her hands and looked across at him with something of the air of an inquisitive kitten. Miles. Ahara leaned back in his chair, and at the sight of her fresh prettiness his brow cleared and he smiled. Well, Asthore. A reproachful finger was raised and a pair of red lips pouted adorably. Now, Miles, confess you've been vastly disagreeable this morning. Twice have I spoken to you and you've not troubled to answer me. Nay, let me finish. And once you growled at me like a nasty bear. Yes, sir, you did. Did I now, Molly? Tease a surly brute you're after thinking me, then? Troth, and I've been sore perplexed, me dear. Lady Ahara got up and sidled round to him. Have you so, Miles? He flung an arm about her and drew her onto his knee. Sure, yes, Molly. Well then, Miles, had you not better tell me what it is that troubles you? She coaxed, laying a persuasive hand on his shoulder. He smiled up at her. "'Tis just an inquisitive puss you are." Again the pout. "And ye should not pout your pretty lips at me if ye are not wanting me to kiss them," he added, suiting the action to the word. "But of course I do," cried my lady, returning the kiss with fervor. "Nay, Miles, tell me." "I see ye mean to have the whole tale out of me, so." "To be sure I do," she nodded. He laid a warning finger on her lips and summoned up a mighty frown. "Now will ye be done interrupting, me lady?" Not a whit abashed, she bit the finger, pushed it away, and folding her hands in her lap, cast her eyes meekly heavenwards. With a twinkle in his own eyes the Irishman continued. "Well, Alanna, ye must know that yesterday evening I was at Kilraw's on a matter of business, and that reminds me, Molly, we had a hand or two at faro and the like before I left, and I had very distressing luck." On a sudden my lady's demure air vanished. "Is that so, Miles? I make no doubt the stakes were prodigious high. Pray, how much have you lost?" "Wisht, darling, 'tis a mere trifle, I assure you. Well, as I was saying, on me way home, what should happen but that we be held up by one of these highwaymen?" My lady's eyes widened in horror, and 2 little hands clutched at his coat. "Oh, Miles." His arm tightened round her waist. "Sure, Asthore, I'm still alive to tell the tale, though 'tis not far I'll be getting with you interrupting at every moment. But, Miles, how terrible. You might have been killed, and you never told me. 'Twas monstrous wicked of you, darling." "Faith, Molly, how should I be telling you when 'twas yourself that was fast asleep? Now will you wisht?" She nodded obediently, and dimpled. "Well, as I say, here was this man standing in the road, pointing his pistol at me. But will ye believe me, me love, when I tell you that that same pistol was as empty as my own?" Here he was shaken with laughter. "Lud, Molly, 'twas the drollest thing. I had me pistol in me hand, knowing 'twas unloaded, and wondering what the devil, saving your presence, was to do next, when the idea struck me that I should try to bluff me fine sir. So I cried out that his pistol was unloaded, and completely took him by surprise. Sure he hadn't time to ask himself how the devil I should be knowing that. He dropped it on the road. After." "Miles, you are becoming very Irish." "Never say so, Alanna. After that 'twas simple enough, and me lord gave in. He held out his hands for me to bind, and here's where 'tis puzzling, Molly. I saw that they were a prodigious sight too white and fine for an ordinary highwayman. So I taxed him with it. 'Twas a gentleman in disguise. How splendid, Miles. Will ye hold your tongue, Asthore, and not be spoiling me story on me?" "Oh, indeed I am sorry. I will be good." And he started and seemed monstrous put out. "What's more, me dear, I heard him speak to his mare in an ordinary, gentleman's voice. Molly, ye never saw the like of that same mare. The sweetest." Pray, never mind the mare, dear. I am all agog to hear about the gentleman highwayman. Very well, me love, though 'twas a prodigious fine mare when I heard him speak, it flashed across me brain that I knew him. No, ye don't, Molly. His hand was over her mouth as he spoke, and her eyes danced madly. But I could not for the life of me think where I had heard that voice. 'Twas but the one word I heard him speak, ye understand, and when I held his wrists I felt that 'twas no stranger. And yet 'tis impossible. When I got him within the coach. How imprudent. He might have wished now. When I got him within the coach I tried to worm his identity out of him, but 'twas to no avail. But when I told him he would have to appear before me today, he went off into a fit of laughing, till I wondered what he was at all. And not another word could I get out of him after beyond yes, sir, and no, sir. Still, I felt that 'twas a gentleman all the same, so He was enveloped in a rapturous embrace. You dear Miles. You let him escape. Sure, Alanna, is it myself that would be doing the like? And me a justice of the peace withal? I told them not to handcuff me lord. Oh, I do so wish you had let him escape, but if 'tis really a gentleman, you will? I will not then, Asthore. I'll be sending him to await the assizes. You are very cruel, then. But, me darling. And I wish to get off your knee. He drew her close. I'll see what can be done for your protégé, Molly. But don't be forgetting he tried to kill the only husband you have. He watched the effect of this with that humorous twinkle in his eye. But my lady was not to be put off. With an empty pistol? Fie on you, Miles. And may I hide behind the screen while you question him? Ye may not. But I wish so much to see him. Ahara shook his head with an air of finality she knew full well. However easygoing and good-natured her husband might be, there were times when he was impervious to all blandishments. So after darkly hinting that she would be nearer than he imagined, she gave up the contest to go and visit young Master David in his nursery. For some time in lockup Carstares had cudgelled his brain to think out a possible mode of escape next day, but try as he might he could light on nothing. If only Miles were not to question him, it was hardly likely that he would be allowed to retain his mask, yet therein lay his only chance of preserving his incognito. He prayed that by some merciful providence Ahara would either fail to recognize him or would at least pretend that he did not. Having decided that there was nothing further to be done in the matter, he lay down on his extremely hard pallet, and went to sleep as if he had not a care in the world. Next morning, after a long and wordy argument with the head gaoler on the subject of masks, he was haled in triumph to the house. As the little cavalcade was about to ascend the steps that led to the front door, my Lady Ahara came gaily forth carrying a basket and a pair of scissors, and singing a snatch of song. At the sight of the highwayman the song broke off and her red lips formed a long-drawn O. She stood quite still on the top step, gazing down at my lord. The two gaolers stood aside to allow her to come down, just as a greyhound darted up the steps and flung itself against her in an exuberance of joy. My lady, none too securely balanced, reeled, the basket fell from her arm, her foot missed the next step, and she tumbled headlong down. But in the flash of an eyelid Carstares had sprung forward and received her in his arms. He lowered her gently to the ground. I trust you are not hurt, madam, he asked, and retrieved her basket, handing it to her. Molly took it with a smile. I thank you, sir, not at all, though I fear I should have injured myself quite considerably had you not been so swift in catching me. 'Twas most kind of you, I am sure. She extended her small hand, and her eyes devoured him. For a moment my lord hesitated, and then, sweeping off his hat, he bowed low over the hand. 'Twas less than nothing, madam, he said in his own cultivated voice. I beg you will dismiss it from your mind. He straightened himself as the gaolers came forward, and put on his hat again. Lady Ahara stepped aside and watched them disappear into the house. Her cheeks were rather flushed, and her eyes suspiciously bright. Suddenly she nodded her head decisively, and throwing away her luckless basket, hurried across the lawn and entered the house through a long window. My lord was conducted to the library, where Ahara sat awaiting him, and slouched forward with his hands thrust deep into his pockets and his hat still on his head. The head gaoler eyed him gloomily, and looked pained when Carstares with studied boorishness leaned carelessly against a fine carved table. "We Ave refrained from handcuffin' Prisoner, sir, at your orders," he said, in a tone that warned Ahara that should harm come of it, on his head be the blame. Miles nodded. "Quite right," he said pleasantly, and glanced at the cloaked and masked figure before him with more suspicion than ever. "But I regrets to Ave to report very obstinate behavior on part of Prisoner, sir," added the gaoler impressively. "Indeed," said Miles gravely. "How so?" Jack controlled an insane desire to laugh, and listened to the gaoler's complaint. "You see the Prisoner, sir, with that great mask on his face. Afore we set out to come here, I told him to take it off. And he refused, sir. Seeing as you gave no orders, I did not force him to Hobie." "Ah, your name, please?" "John Smith, sir," answered Carstares promptly and hoarsely. Ahara wrote it down with a skeptical smile on his lips that Jack did not quite like. "Perhaps ye will have the goodness to unmask." There was a momentary silence. "Why, sir, I thought ye might allow me to keep it on." "Did ye now?" "I will not be allowing any such thing." "But, sir." "'Tis impossible. Off with it." "Sir." "If ye don't take it off, I shall ask these men to assist ye," warned Miles. "May I not speak with ye alone, sir?" pleaded Jack. By now Ahara was greatly intrigued. "Ye may not. Unmask." He was leaning half across the table, his eyes fixed on Jack's face. With a quaint little laugh that made Ahara's brows contract swiftly, my lord shrugged his shoulders French fashion and obeyed. The mask and hat were tossed lightly onto the table, and Miles found himself gazing into a pair of blue eyes that met his half defiantly, half imploringly. He drew in his breath sharply and the thin ivory rule he held snapped suddenly between his fingers. And at that crucial moment a door behind him that had stood ajar was pushed open, and my Lady Ahara came tripping into the room. The two gaolers and her husband turned at once to see who it was, while Jack, who had recognized her, but had not the least idea who she was, fell to dusting his boots with his handkerchief. Ahara rose, and for once looked severe. "What?" he began, and stopped, for without so much as a glance at him, my lady ran towards the prisoner, crying, "Harry! Oh, Harry!" Jack gathered that he was the person addressed, and instantly made her an elaborate leg. The next moment she was tugging at the lapels of his coat, with her face upturned to his. "Harry, you wicked boy," she cried, and added beneath her breath, "My name is Molly." A laugh sprang to my lord's eyes and his beautiful smile appeared. In a stupefied fashion Ahara watched him steal an arm about her waist, and place a hand beneath her chin. The next instant a kiss was planted full on the little lady's lips, and he heard Jack Carstares' voice exclaim, "Fie on you, Molly, for a spoil sport. Here had I fooled Miles to the top of my bent and pon rep. He scarce knows me yet." My lady disengaged herself, blushing. "Oh, Miles, you do know Harry, my cousin Harry?" Ahara collected his scattered wits and rose nobly to the occasion. "Of course I do, me dear, though at first he gave me such a shock, I was near dumbfounded. Ye are a mad, scatterbrained fellow to play such a trick upon us, devil take ye." He laid his hands on Jack's shoulders. "Pray, what did ye do it for, boy?" Jack's brain worked swiftly. "Why, Miles, never tell me you've forgot our wager. Did I not swear I'd have you at a disadvantage, to be even with you for that night at Jasper's? But what must you do but see my pistol was unloaded and make me lose my wager? Still, 'twas worth that and a night in gaol to see your face when I unmask." O'Hara shook him slightly, laughing, and turned to the two amazed gaolers. The senior gaoler met his humorous glance with a cold and indignant stare, and gave a prodigious sniff. "Me good fellows," drawled Miles, "I'm mighty sorry ye've been worried over me young cousin here. He's fooled us all it appears, but now there's naught to be done in the matter, though I've a mind to send him to await the next sessions." He slipped a guinea into each curiously ready palm, and replied to the head gaoler's haughty bow with a pleasant nod. In silence he watched them leave the room, shaking their heads over the incomprehensible ways of the gentry. Then he turned and looked across at Carstares.